Oh, kia ora koutou. Welcome this morning. Kia ora. We're going to make a start. It's just after 1:15. So welcome, Paul, Aurora, and Stephen. Welcome to the table. And before we start on this, big acknowledgement to the big achievement made last week. So nē rā te mihi kia koutou, me tō koutou tīma. So thanks to you and all the team that have done all the hard work getting us to where we are. So just wanted to acknowledge that before we start. So kia ora. Hand over to you guys.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. Thank you very much, Chair, for acknowledging that. This briefing wouldn't be possible, actually, which is all about the improvements for the future, if we hadn't done the work that you just referred to. Some of you know that I come off a sheep and beef farm. I think about the likes of our legacy consents or our backlog consents a little bit like when you're shearing sheep and you've got a whole lot inside. You've got a whole bunch in the shearing shed. You can't actually shear the sheep outside before you shear the ones inside. So the team have well and truly got rid of the sheep that are in the shearing shed and are now thinking about how do they do a much smarter job of shearing the ones outside. If you think about our consenting piece of our business, it's probably the closest thing to a production line that we have. So the things that are about efficiency and improvement, which we have been doing a bunch of over the last year, and we'll talk to you about that, following our Te Hapai methodology and the learnings we've got from that. That's the first part of this presentation. The second part is the thinking that the team has been doing about further improvements in terms of efficiency and effectiveness of our consenting system. So I just wanted to acknowledge the council as well and say thank you very much for the team effort, because it truly was to do the heavy lifting to get rid of those sheep that were in the shed. All right. So over to the team.
Good morning, Council. And I just wanted to start off today, and I know Stephen's already acknowledged it, but a massive thank you on behalf of from me and from my team on not only the support for the decisions that you made that meant that we could get the resourcing and changes made in place to be able to move the sheep out of the shed, but also I know that you all individually had conversations with constituents around the consenting space, and those conversations really helped us move some of our older sheep throughout the process. So I just wanted to really acknowledge that before I get into the presentation today. So thank you from me and from my team. The support has been amazing. Okay. I won't go over to the context too much because I think we know the background of how we got into backlog and that it's a critical function of the role that we do for the community. But I did want to point out that we are very alive to the fact that we're in a period of quite significant change and that we have been thinking about this for the next steps of sustainable consent delivery and whatever central government may throw at us, we are alive to that fact. But it is very much making sure that the production line keeps moving through, but that we're agile and able to adapt to whatever changes come over the next few years. And I will just acknowledge that we've had some practice at that because I think I did a quick count up with my team and you'll be very alive to the fact that we had some big, essentially law changes over the time we were dealing with backlog, but the team came up with about 8 that were quite significant that we had to work through. So that's 8 changes that quite meant we had to adapt our approach and our interpretation throughout the time we were dealing with backlog. Again, I won't labour what we did about it in too much detail, but we obviously pulled together our Sustainable Consents Delivery Plan, and that was really focused on how do we make sure that the organisation is resourced really well. And I'll take you through some learnings from all of the backlog plan, but that we were aligned internally and working towards the kind of common goal of clearing backlog. And absolutely stoked to obviously be able to say that backlog is cleared. So running through some of the kind of core parts of the plan and what we learnt. Resourcing, when we started with backlog, around a third to a half of our work was actually outsourced to consultants. And we had really high turnover in the consents team, sometimes up to about 46% turnover in a year. So not only there's a couple of issues there with the picking up and putting down of applications with different planners, which I'm sure all of you have heard about from your constituents at times, but also the external processing was costing a lot. So we did it twofold. We pulled those applications to a great extent back in-house that were out once we got the resourcing in place that you guys supported. So that was a huge thing, is making sure that we had enough capacity within the team internally to deal with not only backlog, but really important, we resourced for the tsunami of applications that is coming for renewals. So we do have a lot of consent planners in-house, and the team is up to speed and processing really well now. But we have also kept our vast majority of our processing internally, and I expect that we will keep that in the future. Our systems and processes were a huge thing, and looking to the future, we know that we need to be a lot more adaptable with the processes that we use, and also the systems that we use to be able to change how we approach things when legislation changes. That's a work in progress. We actually covered a lot of our inefficient processes with additional admin staff at the start because it wasn't feasible to make the big changes that we needed to at the speed we needed to. But moving forward in the future, that's absolutely what we'll be looking at, is a lot more automation, and I'll talk a bit about that moving forward. And we now know from the work that we did using Te Hapaiō to go where the pain points are in the when I say consenting system, it covers the vast majority of the organisation in various ways. We also did a heap of work with the key players out in the community, so the consultants, and really got them to understand what we needed to do with not only backlog consents, because often it was actually working under different or old pieces of legislation, and how they needed to provide the information that we needed to move old applications through, but also we needed to keep on top of the sheep that we're waiting out in the yard to come into the shed too, because otherwise we would have been building a new backlog. And our consultants, I really need to stress and acknowledge the work that they did to really lift the application quality that was coming in, and that meant that we could keep on top of the new work as well. At the same time, we put in place a drafting gate of aligning the complexity with the new consent structure. And with the applications coming in and the information coming in from consultants in a really clear way, we were able to move that through the system easier, and that's something that we will keep in place going forward. Partnership with mana whenua, we learned very quickly that the volume of backlog was not sustainable for us, but it's also not sustainable for PREs and the systems that we had set up in the past. And that's something that moving forward, we've learnt a lot about how our feedback loops work or don't work in a lot of cases, in terms of when we're pushing through and needing to move a whole lot of consents, how are we picking up and passing on the monitoring of the conditions that mana whenua have input into the process as an example. So taking our partnership in the regulatory space forward, we're working with Papatapu Runanga entities to look at where is the best value in the regulatory process for them to be involved to get and see the outcomes that they would like to see in their rohis. We're also looking at the numbers of... Cool.
Aurora, you just mentioned where they can input into the regulatory process. So that means not all, I suppose with the hierarchy in Te Manawa to Wai, so not all resource consents will go. So does that mean what type of resource consents, or is that what you mean? How will they feed in?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. There's not all, we're not able, as we've covered off in previous briefings, we're not able to send all applications through in the way that we were doing prior to the government changes. But there is the ability for us to be more transparent on what we've already granted and what is in the sort of existing environment in terms of consent conditions and how we're monitoring them. So it really crosses into the compliance space. And we are looking at working with the entities on what types of consents are really important to them in their rohi. And I recognise that's a big question. But being able to make sure that we are putting both my team and the entities are putting the effort where it matters to make sure that we're getting the good outcomes for the activities that they've flagged are really important. So as in the consenting space and the compliance space that we're looking at improving our not only processes but input. Yeah.
I know you have a slide later on, kind of more on the partnership and things. Would you like me to wait for further questions there, or just carry on? Okay. Oh, just on this one on the backlog, just to partnership with Mana Whenua. I know it was a lot of pressure on them, and just acknowledging the prees just for the work they did, and I suppose helping a process to help with streamline. So just I'll probably leave that there, just acknowledging them, and also the work from Environment Canterbury and your team, Aurora, working with the prees as well to help them through this. But hopefully from that process and the clearing the backlog has created a better process. But I'll wait for the slide to come and just to discuss further. Kia ora.
Thanks, Sharon. Let's carry on.
Cool. The other thing that we've learned is we really need to, particularly with the amount of renewals that are coming in, need to be proactive around planning how we approach community members that will be going through reconsenting, particularly with common expiry dates coming up in certain catchments, and making sure that we've got really clear and transparent guidance for them around how things have changed both in the regulatory space, so different legislation, but also what we're seeing in the environment that they're going to need to cover off with their individual activities. Learning from backlog is had we been more transparent and direct on that, then we would have had a different type of applications coming in that were probably structured or better aligned to our planning framework, which would have meant we were able to more easily move those through. So that's quite a big learning and something that we're taking through, and I've got some slides on that shortly.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Just before you move off that particular renewal planning thought, particularly where we've got over-allocated zones, we do have some rules in our plan around 10% reductions or being able to show that you've got efficient water use requirements. How are we dealing with some of the areas that have had specific plan change? And I'm just thinking OTOP area, I guess, down there, where there isn't offers common renewal dates, and so therefore the first consents in seem to be expected to take huge haircuts of allocation and to get back to some sort of limit that isn't consistent, as I see it in the rules. And it's slightly different in Waimakariri, where we have got in the plan some common dates. So yeah.
Yeah. it is a real issue, and it is going to be a challenge for the consents team moving forward, but also for all of ECAN. What we're looking at doing, and it's again a multifaceted approach as most of those things are. We're working really closely with the consultants. They approached us very early on. I think it was about 2 years ago, and said this is going to cause some perverse outcomes unless we're onto it. They've been working really hard in the pre-application space to align, bringing in some of the renewals that might have slightly longer times to go on their permit. They're actually actively bringing them in earlier, which is really, really helpful for my team when we can then look across what's happening in the catchment, as opposed to just individual person by person, because you're spot on. If we have to look at it individually, it will result in people needing to take bigger haircuts. We're also looking at, is there mechanisms for us to be able to review? In most cases there are. Some consents to bring in line with an overall catchment goal. And those are the ones that aren't coming in just yet. Those are sort of the 26, 27. And we're pulling together a plan between consents and compliance planning to go, actually, what's the regulatory approach here to get the outcome that the catchment and the plan expects, rather than exactly what you've highlighted, individuals needing to be, because they're first in the nature of first in, first serve, rather than them needing to take the big haircuts. So it does require the community to come on board with a bit of a plan. Because from a consenting perspective, applying the first in, first served rules that we need to follow could have perverse outcomes.
Yeah, and so we do, as I understand it, if I just may get some clarity around or get some confirmation, is that we also do need to be careful when we're looking at renewals of those consents or reviewing them, that we don't put people out of business, don't we? So there is that tension there. Okay.
Thanks, Claire. Nick, you got a question?
Yeah, just to add to what Claire said, and probably her last comment, I know in the Rari catchment there's almost 8 years from the first consent been coming up to the last one, and the first ones have been told they've got to take a 50% cut, and really struggling to make money, and there's one family lost $200,000 last year, so we do need to give us some serious consideration.
Thanks, Nick. That was just a comment, not a question. Thank you.
Yes, it was a comment. Yeah.
Thanks.
So I guess it's how can we fast track this to get everyone lined up?
Not sure. Have you got any response? Yeah.
Apart from what I've said in terms of making sure that we're really transparent with the communities and we're working with them to make sure that the catchments are taking a catchment approach. That's about what we can do from the consenting perspective. But absolutely, I think we should be looking at all of the tools that we've got available to us, both regulatory and non-regulatory, and making sure we've got a plan that addresses that. And I have made a note around that 50% to look into.
So I know there's quite a few questions from councillors. We're only on slide 1 of many. Are people able to hold it to the end, or you really feel like you need to ask it at this moment? What's that? He's happy? Okay, keep going.
Mine was just regarding about the review, though, of each consent when they come up within, I guess, fully allocated areas, like you mentioned, the OTOP area, which is, I think, up to 4 times allocation. So when it comes to review, I'm wondering if it's able to be considered for a huge clawback on some of those consents, or I guess an alternative is to allow them to resign or hand in those water consents in particular. Yeah, especially in over-allocated catchments.
I mean, in another way, what is the approach there?
Yeah, I can respond to that. And also, these points are covered in more detail
Oh, cool.
later in this.
Okay, well, let's carry on, eh?
But I am okay with
Yep.
However you want to run it, because we're covering.
Oh, no, that's okay. Sorry. Yeah, I've jumped in a bit late in the day, so yeah, that's fine.
No,
if it's covered. Cheers.
We'll cover it later when we get to it. And if you want to ask a question, then you can. Thank you. So let's carry on. I think Ian said he's okay. Yep. Oh,
Yeah, well,
we can't hear you, Ian. You got a real bad line. We'll just carry on, and we'll hopefully your line sorts itself out. We'll come back later. Let's carry on.
Cool. So I've covered a lot of this already. Apologies for the typo/bad grammar in the third point there. But just no allocation on paper and then actual use. And a lot of, I think, the approach that we need to look at is working out what's been allocated on paper and then what is actually being used in the catchment. And we have, through the course of backlog, actually been picking up some consents that have been issued but never actually used. And we've been having conversations with those applicants, because it's the part of the process they're in, on is this still needed? Are you using it? What's the plan with it? And in a lot of cases where we've found those, they've said, no, that's actually okay to be cancelled because we've got other water sources available. And working out through those processes also will go quite a long way to the approach for over-allocation. Again, it is a really multifaceted approach that we're going to need to take in the regulatory space to address this. I've probably covered off most of this, but when we're dealing with the catchment-based consents renewals, it really is an across-organisation approach between our regulatory teams and our water and land teams to make sure that we've got the support out there in the community to be ready for the reconsenting, and we're providing the advice that people need early, and that's a massive learning from backlog, is having people prepared for how things have changed from the last time that they went through the process, because it has changed significantly, and that is one of the biggest things that we hear from applicants, is they just didn't expect how much things have changed from last time. So to approach consenting particularly, and what we've been talking about with around water allocation and things, we're working internally to make sure that our science and our technical advice is really aligned, in identifying areas where a more general approach to technical advice could be provided in the early stages of consenting, so in the pre-application space before applications come in, and sharing that with the community so that they can then build on that and provide us the detailed effects from their activity and an assessment around that as it's required for their consenting process. So that's work that we'll be doing moving forward over the next year with our science team, and making sure that we've got that able to be communicated really transparently to the community. It might be a good point here to pause for questions for the external part before I jump into the kind of what we can do with automation.
So I'll go to you, Joe, and then Ian, if you've got your question and you've got a good line, you can jump in after that, and then I'll go to Vicky. Where you go, Joe?
Do you have like a ballpark idea of the percentage of the processes that were automated before the program and now the percentage?
Yeah, so we have been measuring that, and we're 30% more efficient in terms of processing consents through. And that is down to measuring our automation that we put in place, because we did have data before we input some of our automated tools, which is a program that essentially pulls the planning framework through that is relevant to an activity, so that our consent planner, rather than them needing to manually wade through all of the plan rules, it automatically populates specific to the activity that's being applied. So that alone made us 30% more efficient.
There you go.
And what artificial intelligence models or platforms are we using?
In terms of a name, or so the one I just referenced is called Rico, and that is an AI software that essentially does the admin in terms of pulling plan assessments through. We are looking at how else AI is being used elsewhere. So my leadership team had a presentation from a researcher who's looking at how AI can be used in the regulatory space from Waikato University, and it's an emerging space essentially, but we are watching what's coming out of other areas.
Ian, have you got your question ready? And you're in a good spot. Oh, yeah, where you go?
Can you hear?
We can now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we sure
I did
can.
send the question to Claire, but look, I was just wondering, Aurora, going back to that question that Claire and Nick were talking about, and it's cutbacks and over-allocated zones. How much flexibility is that? Not everybody's been allocated on the same basis. So I know down our way, a lot of allocations were done at 3.5 mils per hectare per day to get the seasonal allocation. And so a cutback on that is more severe than if, and I'm aware that maybe just some of the older consents were allocated 10 millimetres per hectare per day upcountry. So a cutback can be more severe where you've had a lower allocation in the first place. Is there flexibility in your, or have you got flexibility or discretion to be able to, when you're doing a sort of catchment overview of and treating individual consents, the ability to modify the cutbacks accordingly? It's caused quite a lot of angst when people are lining up for a certain percentage cutback that they were given a skint allocation in the first place.
Hopefully I've captured your question correctly. It was a bit of a bad line, sorry, Councillor McKenzie. Quite a detailed...
Claire's actually got the question in front of her. I think she should have.
I mean, I think I'll answer it quite generally. But this is the nature of the complexity that we're going to need to grapple with over the coming years in terms of dealing with over-allocation. In a lot of cases, yes, there is some discretion in the plan rules, and it is, again, a case-by-case basis in terms of what people have been are applying for, and most importantly, what they have been using. So that being able to demonstrate use and the reasonable use is really important when it comes to reconsenting. And in some cases, we don't have that data that's available over past years, and that does make the job for the team harder. But we do, again, case-by-case basis. If we've got discretion and the applicant is able to demonstrate actual and reasonable use and it aligns with the plan, then we do work with them through the best approach.
Yeah. So reasonable use, and that's maybe where the discretion is needed, because in cropping and perhaps even horticulture, especially because they tend to be centred on heavier soils, probably have a much greater swing in use from season to season, depending on the length of the season when the dry patches occur. Whereas I've observed on my own dairy farm that the use is a much flatter use because it's a longer season. So dry patch at the end of the summer doesn't affect the cropping farm so much, but it does affect the dairy farm. But in terms of reasonable, yeah. there is flexibility in reasonable use. I think that's where we'll need to use it the most in assessing on cropping farms the huge fluctuation in use from year to year. Some years we don't need irrigation at all on the cropping land, and other years we start in September and go right through. So it's a question of how you assess that reasonable use, I guess.
Thanks, Ian. Good point you raised.
Yeah.
Genevieve?
Can I just jump in here really quickly? I suspect that there will be a bunch of questions about this, rightfully so, particularly with the significant number of consent renewals. There is a piece of work, and Aurora has referred to it, around actual use versus actual allocation on paper that the organisation is doing to help better inform the way we go about doing those consent renewals. It's my suggestion that we bring that detailed piece of work back to you in the new year, if that's okay, because there's quite a lot of complexity here, and it could take a fair amount of our time talking about it now, if that's okay with you, Chair.
That sounds good, and that relates to Genevieve's question as well, because immediately I thought...
Actually, it doesn't. Sorry, Chair.
Well, not this, Nick. Your previous question, I mean, Genevieve.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Regarding actual allocation...
Genevieve, can you just wait a second? Thanks. Because on that point, what it made me think about was, do we actually have that data that shows that on paper versus, like, it's almost like a budget report. But is that published on our website and all that, like, available?
It's not easily available.
Okay, cool.
We've got work to do there.
Sweet, thank you. Genevieve, where you go?
Oh, sorry, yeah. Just with regards to paper allocation versus actual, I guess it's only as good as the information on the actual water available and the allocation. So my question is, do you think it's appropriate now to really take a good look at the allocation of water?
I think yes, and that's what we'll need to do through the reconsenting process. But I think the best approach here is to bring back a presentation on what we're doing specific to water allocation in the new year.
I mean, the short answer is we have to. We have to understand what we're talking about here to enable those consent renewals to happen. And you've seen the data on, really it's, and excuse the pun, but it's a tidal wave of them if our existing planning framework stays the same. So understanding this allocation question, like I say, there is a piece of work underway that does exactly what the Chair talked about, which essentially is show you your budget of actual versus on-paper allocated use so that you're better informed around where water is being used and what is actually available for use. Yep.
Cool, thank you. Vicky?
Yeah, Mike, I was similarly going to question how confident we are in the amount of water we've determined is actually available within each catchment, because I'm not sure if there's been more recent work done, but certainly in the past, what I remember seeing when I was doing Masters of Water Resource Management seemed to be pretty back of the envelope type of calc was my sense of it, and I've got the sense that it would be refined in time, but I don't know that has yet happened. And so to sort of be determining what's on paper and what's in real use, if we don't know what actually the catchment can manage, and that we should also be having an eye to climate change as well, which is really going to change things when you start looking at how much evapotranspiration is going to be increasing with increasing winds and increasing hot days. There's a lot of complexity in there, which does need a good run in terms of science. And so hopefully we've got some thinking going on already about that, but quite how that fits in with this current wave of consents coming through. The other, so I'm getting lots of nods, which means it's obviously already on the radar and being thought about. So that's great. And then I think Ian's question is that relating to the sort of the grandfathering, because that was another thing that I sort of remember, is this sense that if you were in early, you get sort of like you've got sort of almost like a better set of or better access to water, and then subsequent people coming in find it more difficult to get the same access. And whilst, I think of it as being a bit like a patent where, you go in and you've got some advantage at the front end, but actually you sort of need to have the system able to shift, such as when we're looking at the PCE's report and going with the grain, that ability to change rather than just being locked in when we know that perhaps there's some problems around that. So how do we work, and in trying to sustainably shift and move to more sustainable ways, how do we avoid, because the other thing I've been have heard is that you can actually incentivize sort of more profligate use or more profligate leaching in the interim, but when you apply these sort of like blunt percentage decreases and stuff like that, which I think is what Ian's talking about, actually specific, and maybe you're sort of another presentation might cover all of that in more detail.
So I might just jump in really quickly because again, that there is actually coming to the Regional Delivery Committee in March. So there's a paper on water allocation, which will attempt to capture all of your questions that you've asked today and cover those things off there. Is that okay? Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Yayan. And Ian, just you're unmuted. Just there you go. Thank you.
I was just going to comment. Vicky asked a question about what I was meaning, and I was just going to clarify that.
It's all good. Like, we're going to deal with it in March, Ian.
It was to do with soils. Yeah.
I think we'll just deal with it in March because we're going to get all that information coming to us. Thank you.
Kia ora, Stephen. If we go back a couple of slides, sorry, I thought we were going to wait questions right to the end-to-end catchment-based consent renewals. That's the one. Just on, just reading that, prioritising catchments with common expiry dates and degraded receiving environments. It's probably not the common expiry dates, but as you know, we're going through a big issue down in Glenavy and at Waihole with the over 50 milligram per litre of nitrates in the drinking water. And I know some work is underway, but it's just probably trying to understanding in the future, can we, is talking about renewal, etc., but can we recall the consents? Because this is a big issue, right? I mean, because, degraded receiving environments, a process moving forward, because I know, you've got a lot of mechanisms running through the organisation to help this process, but probably, thinking about Ashburton and other areas what we've done before. So is that a possibility?
Just so the short answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, we did that in Otu Wharekai. So we can do those things when the law changes, when our planning framework changes, or if the receiving environment, there is some significant change in that. We can absolutely recall things. Remembering that the regulatory piece is the front end of a holistic approach, that there is, for me, the bottom line, but there's a whole bunch of other things that can actually be done. And that memo sent to councillors talks about that. So there's a whole lot of other things you can do in partnership with the Runanga down there, but also with industry and with the irrigation scheme, which are well and truly beyond those regulatory requirements. Yeah.
So would you say recall would be the last resort?
Yeah, it depends on the context, and that would be something that we would consider like we did in Otu Wharekai. Yeah.
I might just
sorry, I've got John one more, then we'll move on. Yeah. Sorry.
I think it's just important to on recall. That's, I think they're looking at the review. So when we say review in recall, we don't have the ability to essentially cancel anyone's consent. So I just wanted to make that really clear. We only have, through environmental effects or anything like that, we've only got tools through the review where essentially we do call it back in and we say, hey, let's have another look at this through our review tools. So I just wanted to make that distinction on what the RMA mechanisms are. Sorry.
That's good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just ask a question. If I go back to the Selwyn where we had the consent reviews, we had WQN 9 and the new models where we were looking at 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. Where does that sit now within your processes when we had those agreements, I guess, across a community as to where we should land? And there seems to be a potentially a disparity between how it's being applied today as to the agreed position that we put the community into.
I probably can't talk too much detail on that, but I have been working with the Eastern Plains Land User Group, and they are very alive to that, and they are pulling together a plan for reconsenting in line with what has gone on in the past, and they're being very, very proactive because their consents don't actually expire until I think the first one's at 2028. So they're pulling together how we're actually going to approach this, and that's the sort of approach that we want to see the community proactively taking coming into renewals.
I guess it's supplementary. The Eastern Plains, that piece of the Selwyn didn't go through a review process, whereas the other piece did. So just again, it's the question: how do we give effect to what was agreed? I guess at that period of time versus maybe how we're looking at things today.
What I might do is put a note to bring that back in how we're going to approach the allocation.
Thanks, Aurora. Well done. Yeah, let's carry on. What did you have a question, David? Sorry.
No, more of a statement. I just think we're digressing into a lot of
we are.
consenting issues where we're here to have an update on sustainable consents delivery program. So can we stick to the...
Yep, let's go.
Cool, thank you. So coming and looking at internally now and what we need to do. Again, we learned a lot about where our processes and our systems were, and they're definitely probably the volume of consents far exceeded where our systems and our processes sort of had the capacity to deal with, and that was a massive factor for dealing with backlog. So moving forward over the next couple of years, we'll be looking at twofold, both of our processes in terms of how we move the production line through, and where we have the ability to essentially strip out some of our now probably redundant processes internally and replace with automation. And really, really important that needs to be able to adapt to any legislation changes, because that was another big learning is when I was trying to do reporting to come and say, this is how we're going, where we have older systems that don't align to the new requirements of the RMA, or they have been updated but don't reflect what we need to look at for old applications. It made a very, very complex situation to try and report on in terms of what's on hold and what's not. So the team did a massive amount of work, and not my team, the digital team, to actually work out what are we looking at and how do we fix it going into the future. So that was a massive learning, making sure that the processes and the systems all align to be able to adapt to the changing nature of our regulatory space. That's essentially what I've just covered, but a point on the end there just to reiterate it, making sure that we're able to actually transparently, externally, show the community how things are going. And I think that's a bit of a twofold. What's the environment that they're dealing with and what do they need to be doing in terms of putting their applications together? So we're doing some work on that too.
Clear, and then we'll go to questions at the end. Thank you, if you can hold that. Thanks.
Just touching on this, and we covered this off a bit with some questions earlier, but the future, I think, for looking at our overall consent resourcing is really needs to be centred around AI and how we can get smarter with the use of AI in our consenting processes. Again, multiple ways we can do that, but looking at what is simple consents out there that can be largely essentially done by the computer to say, yes, it's appropriate to put a bore here, or no, it's not, as an example. And then the AI to assist the technical thinking that the consent planners need to do for the more complex applications that we see. again, already covered some of this in questions, but looking at, well, we first need to adapt to the latest government changes in partnership. What does that mean for our working relationship and processes with our prees? So over the next few weeks and into next year, the real focus for the consents team with our prees is what does the volume of consents going through look like to prees? And how do we still give visibility on applications that are being lodged? And then most importantly, how would mana whenua like to define what's most important to them that they would like to see in the consenting space, and then making sure that we've got the really robust feedback loops in place and the carry through into the compliance space. So we've got the monitoring information coming back in and able to be considered by both mana whenua and by our teams. Cool. A big part of that is around making sure that we've got the capacity right and going into the future. We were really on the back foot, as were the prees, on the volume of consents that we needed to deal with and how we dealt with them. And capacity as well, also consideration around scope. Had we been more able to be proactive, working through the being transparent with the community also applies to the entities and mana whenua themselves on what we consider the key pressures are from a science perspective and how that fits into mana whenua's worldview on our regulatory space. Cool. I'm now going to go into how we're planning on measuring these things I've spoken about. So
maybe we'll take some more questions there. Cool. Okay, cool. So I've got Claire first, Peter, and then you again. So Claire.
Mine goes back a few slides and it's really around the process improvements. Sorry, mine goes back through your chair around the slide around process improvements across all the systems, and definitely acknowledge the improvements in the consenting process. But there is the part from the work being recorded and being invoiced and then going out to the applicant, and then very much what I'm hearing quite frequently, really, and I'm only just one small councillor sitting here, that the account goes out as sort of one line, and then people say, well, what's this for? And it'll be a big figure. And then so they flick something back into accounts receivable, please explain. And it goes around a number of emails and people, and largely the response, people have been happy with the response there, but very frustrated that they need to do that. And then there's often some discount or something like that. So that part of it still seems to be costing us a lot. And you sort of mentioned a 2 years process here, and I'm thinking, we can't wait 2 years. So, yeah, I'm hoping for some positive timeframes.
I'll make a few comments about that, and noting that we've got a fees and charges discussion next, which will kind of link in. Yes, it is very frustrating. It's frustrating for applicants, we know that, and it's also frustrating internally. We've got a really clear idea on what we need to fix now from all the work that we've done dealing with backlog, and now that the old sheep are out of the shed, we can really pick up and focus that. So my expectation is that I agree, 2 years is too long, but it is now that we've over the backlog, we've got the capacity across the organisation to look at what needs done and how we do it quicker and take these learnings and build on it. But do you want to?
Oh, and just to make the point, this is a 12-month plan, so we really want to drive some efficiencies and change. So the benefit of this, we'll be back reporting and giving you the updates. So hopefully you'll see a lot of transition and change in the next 12 months.
Just going to use the example. So we're going to change the breed and use self-shedding sheep.
So you'll see in the rest of the PowerPoint, which is about the improvements, one of them is about financial things. Yeah, and as Aurora has said, you've got a paper which is a little step in that direction. I hope that it'll be a lot better in 12 months' time.
Cool. Peter?
Yeah, just sticking with that sheep analogy, I just noticed some of those that are outside the shed, Stephen, might need crutching, so just be aware of that before the shearers will accept them. But my point, Stephen, or my question, and it doesn't need to be answered here, is what's the opportunity to start going for more global consenting to uncomplicate what we're trying to do here, using things like farm environment plans as a head consent for the activities that are in a unit, and therefore uncomplicating the number of consents we have. So that's my question.
A massive opportunity there for global consents, absolutely. And I do know that some of the catchment groups that we're working with are looking at that as an alternative to individual consenting. And it is something that we would encourage. And there have been sort of some conversations had in the pre-application space with various catchment groups around the approach to a global consent as opposed to individuals. But again, that is really on the applicants to decide what they would like to do and how they'd like to manage those resources across their activities, be it collectively or individually. And we need to process what comes in the door. But the key is really making sure that they're engaging in that pre-application space so that we know what's coming and we can work with people to say, these are the things that we would need to see to get over any concerns that we've got, and make sure that the environmental effects are managed appropriately through that process.
Thanks, Aurora. Good question, Peter. Yane?
Kia ora koutou. So just back to the mana whenua engagement in consenting. It was good yesterday in our strategy, hui on land, etc. We talked about mana whenua and partnership and actually rangatiratanga and what that looks like and how we do that. And I suppose this is, pertains to this as well and to resource consents because, we have the bottom line, Resource Management Act and the Local Government Act. We have Part 2, 6C, 7A, 8, 36A. We have Part 6, Section 95 and 104 for the resource consents. So that's our bottom line. And, that's what we have to do. But I suppose what I want to talk about is, governments are cyclic. And, we've been forced into this, this process we're in at the moment. So how do we make sure that, and then Aurora, you're up at Te Kahika, we talked about partnership and I suppose putting a stake in the sand and saying, this is we don't want bottom line because that's what we've done, way back in the past. We've gone so far with, working with mana whenua, having that relationship with prees, etc. And I know you've I think Manaia said you had a hui with them, Paul, was it a couple of days ago or something? Yeah. So, I've run into Manaia and talked about it, the relationship with Mahanui, Kuratile, etc. And you probably got other hui with prees coming up. So how do we, we have the bottom line, but that's down here. We want to be, we say we want to be partnership of excellence, treaty partnership of excellence. So how do we show that? And I suppose that's, with this current environment we're in.
Kia ora, Councillor Cranwell. We've obviously talked about these sorts of things before, and I think your points are absolutely correct. We have a partnership and we want to be a partner of excellence. To me, there are two probably bits to your question. The really high-level piece, and I think it's really important, it's the front-end piece. It's the reset hui that are being had with Runanga. Which are about, looking back on our partnership journey and seeing how things have gone, but really importantly, looking forward about aspirations into the future. And I think that will really help. The second piece is when it comes to this piece of our business, so the regulatory piece, is what is important to Runanga. So those conversations that the team has been having with the prees have been talking about that. And one of the really strong messages that have been coming through is don't break the good work that's been done in terms of the way we've been doing consenting, remembering that not all consents Runanga have an interest in. So how do we capture that into the future, noting that there are bottom lines around what we can and can't consider, and the law prescribes that actually. And then the next bit is, which we've only really recently started talking about with them in a really positive way, is about compliance. So they're all really, really interested in partnering in compliance work. That there has probably been and the team might want to comment more on this, but the loudest thing that we've heard, and we're, as you know, piloting a piece of work around that with AEC down in Arawhenua's takiwa. So to me, they are the things that we need to keep doing. So I agree with you, but at the same time, we do have to adhere to the law. You will note in the messages that have gone out to them, there's a really important word in those messages, in my mind anyway. It says interim. I don't know if you noticed the word interim. It talks about developing up based on the learnings and the way we want to work into the future about collective aspirations, working on the protocols that we've got in our SLA agreements with the PREs. In the interim, the approach we will take is basically a bottom line, here's the law. But we need to work through what that looks like in the future. Yeah. So I hope that answers some of your question, Councillor.
And Paul, at all?
I echo what Stephen said. We will just continue to meet and discuss and look at the opportunities, the conversations that we're trying to have around how do we increase certainty around the work that we do together and how we work, and each PRE has their own view, as you would no doubt understand, but the opportunity to continue to develop partnerships through compliance approaches is seeming to be a really interesting space that I think we just need to keep working through, and I'm personally quite excited about it. So we'll continue to meet and bring that good work back to this council.
Just on that, Paul, what's the timeline on this work, and I suppose for and then coming back?
Well, I think we're hopefully meeting with all the PREs, perhaps bar one this week and next week, and so perhaps there'll be some good an update for council in the new year. But I think we'll share the work as widely as possible. But yeah, just recognising we've not quite got to every PRE, so it's and like I say, each PRE will have their own perspective. But yeah, in the new year, I think there'll be opportunities to provide some decent updates.
I know it's it's a changing world. As Aurora mentioned at the start, so many legislation changes, and it's just putting pressure on not only us and the staff, but also relationships outside this building. But it's just it's good to hear that work is being done, and that we are trying to find that way forward by working together, because we don't just want to echo words, we want to kind of actually put those into action. So kia ora.
Now, I know we've got three more councillors that want to ask a question just now, but and what I'm suggesting is we've got three pretty important slides left, I believe. Can we just get through them, and then I'll come back to those three if we've got some time left at the end. And would that work for you, Aurora? Thank you. So I've got you noted down, Nick, Grant and Dion.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So moving forward, goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, is everything that we're doing is to make sure that we don't end up back in a backlog again. So breaking it down into 2 points around capacity and capability, and then also the complexity. And we've touched on a bit of the complexities that we're going to come up against as an organisation and as a community over the coming years, particularly in the water allocation space. But looking at our capacity, making sure that everything that we do, particularly in the consenting team, and working with consultants and applicants, is making sure that our timeframe compliance is adhered to. And that actually, once you start getting into the detail of a consent process, there is a lot of steps through a consent process in terms of where timeframes come into play. And the really big learning from backlog, and what we will take a really hard line moving forward, is making sure that anything that goes out for further information and requests from applicants does come back in a timely manner, and that applicants meet the timeframes that they've sort of indicated to us that they need to get information together. That was quite a big thing for some of the backlog consents, as where information that was needed was dragged out over, in some cases, many, many years. And that's something that causes issues into the future, or can cause issues into the future, where you've got an existing environment where there's applications that haven't progressed and they're potentially operating under Section 124 rights, continuation rights, and that essentially skews the legislative considerations that we need to look at in terms of what's in the existing environment and what's not. Because you can expect that those older activities, they're going to be getting better, because that's what all of our planning framework is asking people to do, is do things better in line with good management practice or best management practice. And when you've got some of those old activities that are not moving forward as fast as they should through the reconsenting process, it can mean that the view that we need to take in terms of existing environment is really complex to work through. So that timeframe compliance sounds simple on the outset, but it does mean a commitment from everyone in the process to keep moving things through and making sure that we're resolving those applications as fast as we possibly can, within reason, obviously. And that's a message that we've been working with our consultants forum as well, to make sure that people understand that practices that we've done in the past, with being very lenient on requesting that information, that we'll be asking people to please stick to the timeframes that they give us. And likewise, we will be sticking to our timeframes that we have set out. And that's where we really tie into our pre-application service and asking people to be ready and understand and have a good idea of what the process is going to look like and what they're dealing with before they lodge. A whole lot of other capacity factors, obviously. Consenting is massive and touches right across the organisation. But these are the big list of things that we'll be measuring both internally and externally to make sure that we are really alive to the fact that our capacity is tracking well. Just keep going, Craig.
Yep, definitely.
I'm just conscious of time, so I'm not going to go too much more into those specific capacity ones. But looking now at our capability, moving forward, we'll be measuring, and we already do, our number of decisions per week. That was a really key metric that we measured to make sure that that there was more work always going out on a weekly basis than was coming in. And our ratio is obviously really important. We've put it into our long-term plan as a level of service. But that measure, it also links into our complexity, because we've got our drafting gate of complexity, and the team now assesses applications quite robustly up front, so we know what we're dealing with when they come in, and we can measure per team. The significant consents team obviously deals with the more complex applications, so that is capability and complexity is quite interlinked there. So the numbers of decisions, while it's quite a simple number, it actually has a lot of detail built in behind to enable us to understand how the team's tracking with things. Customer satisfaction is something that we haven't been good at measuring in the past, but we've got a new sort of customer feedback process, which is organisation-wide, that's been worked on, and consensus looking at how do we use this to make sure that the pain points, as I know there are many to be worked on, are able to be picked up and dealt with quickly, and that we've got an ability to collect those feedback points and work on where we need to change our systems and processes in response to customer feedback. And then we can break that down into obviously the different pathways that a consent goes through and align that to the team. Probably covered off that as well.
I think I've got Grant.
Thanks very much. Yeah, this is pretty complex, isn't it? I like the comment from Councillor Scott about the opportunity going forward of looking at more global consenting, particularly for sub-catchment-based solutions where you can have more bespoke approaches to individual groups of farmers who are all part of a system. We've talked a lot about the efficiencies that you're undertaking and the use of digital and AI. In the consenting process, in the review process, what on the ground truthing do you takes place in terms of looking at the landscape, if you like, that this application is forming part of? How do you deal with that? Is that an external visit to the site? You know, how do you deal with that?
Great question. So, average consent that we issue has a lifespan of 7 years, and they have obviously a 7-year life of monitoring that's expected. Some of that is monitoring that the consent holder needs to provide us, and we assess that as it comes into the building. And some of it is field-based or site visit-based, both by external providers and then by our own compliance team. And the information that is gathered from those monitoring visits is then collated with the sort of state of the environment monitoring that goes on, so that we understand what's happening on individual properties and with their individual consent, and then how it fits into the wider catchment or environment context. And then as something comes in for renewal, then we assess all of that information together. So that is how the compliance piece fits in with the consent application, and the two should fit together like that. And then thirdly into the planning, so that you've got a bigger feedback loop to go what's working and what's not with our plan rules and framework.
Just supplement. So, and that too sort of relates a little bit to what Councillor Scott was saying in terms of you have farm environment plans that help support the application in a way in any pre-auditing reviews that might have taken place during the consenting monitoring process. And in a collective situation where you have people side by side, I suppose they are part of what you talk about, the broader assessment of what's happening within the catchment. Thanks.
Cool. Dion?
Thank you all for, I think the chair said it before, but thanks for the work that you've done to get the consenting backlog out of the building. Thanks to the Chief Executive for her leadership as well in this space. I think it needs to be acknowledged. I know that there's a couple of questions I have. I know we put a lot of financial resource into getting the backlog sorted out, which is fine. But are we going to be bringing back, I'm quite keen on closeout reports to understand where things were, what the money was used for, how it was done. So looking backwards, kind of what you've done here is looking forwards, but line, I suppose, for the sort of out the gate resource that we did put in it. I don't know if that's something that we want to do, but it's just something that's in the back of my mind that we as a council probably need to, be a little bit more lifting our game. And I think they should probably go through the audit and risk committee for those kind of things. I think we've got one coming for us from the strengthening and the Odeon facade. The question that I had around I have one around the digital solutions as well. In your presentation, you talk a lot about consistency, which is great. In the digital solutions, have we done a lot of, AI is great, a great tool, but it does have an intrinsic bias. So are we doing training for our staff around the bias of AI, understanding those biases so that we actually get good results, consistent results from what we're using? I know this is moving technology, but I just want to have that assurance at this stage that is being thought about.
Yeah, there will absolutely be some questions around how it's used in our professional context. Just to reiterate, though, the only way we're using AI at the moment is for the pulling through of the planning frameworks. It's not doing any assessing of the activities, and we would need to do some work in terms of how do we make sure that it is assessing the right things if we go down that road. So that's quite a broad subject, and I think probably one that's would need some assistance with digital team and how we would put policies around the use of AI.
Just on that, are you doing like spot checks to make sure there's no hallucinations of the system or all those kind of things that are going in behind the scenes?
Yeah, so that's been built into our peer review process for the pulling through and making sure that we are capturing the right planning framework and things like that. But that's part of the planner's role, is to assess, have we got the right roles for the activity and what do those roles mean for the activity? That's the important part. Yeah.
David?
Thanks. Look, great presentation, sort of highlighting the some of the processes and things that you're working on, and congratulations on the reduction that you've achieved to date. Two questions, sort of interlinked. Going forward now, what does your team see as the greatest obstacle or obstacles to progressing to the next level? And secondly, is there anything that we as governors could assist in getting you to a better space?
Greatest challenge, I think, is going to be a lot of what the discussion's been based on today, is working out how we approach the reconsenting of our water use in Canterbury in a fair and equitable way. And I'm going to do too, the central government change that we're getting, because we're in a period of massive change, as you know. So being able to adapt and make sure that we're giving really great service to the community through that in our regulatory space is going to be the biggest challenge, I think, over the next few years. That's from my perspective and my team, but probably Stephen and Paul would have some things to add. And yeah,
nothing else.
Look, I think that's bang on, noting that this presentation is about the next 12 months. So I think if we want to be a smarter regulator, beyond the things Aurora has talked about, we're going to have to be much more strategic than the things that Aurora just mentioned. Yeah, but they are a much larger conversation and not for today. And the good thing is that the Chief Executive and the senior leadership team are thinking about those things, and I know talking with the Chair and the Deputy about them as well. So.
Oh, I've got a couple more questions, sorry. Nick, did you still have a question?
Yes, a lot of it's been covered off. I mean, just adding to what Dion said, I'd like to see some accountability around this, what we've achieved to date, and I guess our plan going forward, and then just adding to what Peter was talking about, global consents and that. And I mean, those of us who know about farming and shearing, there's no money in shearing sheep at the moment, so the less time we need to bring them into the shed, the better. And can we make these consents longer, because it is restricting our ability to go to our bankers and borrow money and have succession plans going forward, and have efficiency around irrigation and things like that.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, through the Chair, thanks, Councillor Ward. You are segueing nicely into exactly what I was mentioning before, that there is a much bigger conversation, yeah, and not for today, but I definitely think we'll be talking about it next calendar year.
Cool, thank you. Ian, and you had your hand up earlier too?
Yeah, look, I think if I ask my question, Stephen will say, look, we're dealing with that next year, so I'll
good.
far.
Thanks, Ian.
And
Joe? And then
I was just going to say, we're pleased to know that we're hoping to stand up an artificial intelligence working group in the new year, so we'll keep you across it.
Cool. And Aurora, over to you.
Cool. So a lot of this was obviously based on sort of next steps that you can expect to see. And I think we've got a few actions here in terms of information that we'll bring back to you around specific points. I did just want to acknowledge the question around support, the second part of your question, Councillor Ace. Thank you for that. I think we're talking a bit about in the next briefing around support in terms of making sure that our financial, our fees and charges policy is right. There will be things like that I bring back or the team brings back to this council over the next year, where it is a continuous improvement, iteration and changes that we need to make internally that this council will need to consider. And as I bring them through, the support that you've already shown for sorting out backlog, again, much appreciated. And I'll flag that support to make sure that we don't end up back in this situation that we've just dealt with. So thank you, I appreciate your question. In terms of next steps, I've got a few papers there around more focusing on the financials and where the money was spent. So we'll add that as a next step, and we'll take a conversation back on where that's best to go to, and also a focused presentation on the water allocation and how we'll be dealing with that in the new year. We're also working on everything that I've covered in terms of our measurements and metrics, how we are reporting that and demonstrating to this council and to the wider community confidence in our regulatory space, and particularly our consenting function. And we're looking at pulling together some of those improvements that we'll be making into some dashboard type reporting for council to make sure that we are able to easily demonstrate that the changes that we're making are taking us where we need to go in the consenting and regulatory space. Cool. I think that's
great. Thank you so much. And hey, once again, just acknowledging all the work that's happened. And as Dion said, I was going to do a mihi to Stephanie for the work that she's done in leading this process, because I remember, some of the presentations we've had on this in terms of, the oldest consent we had was 2002, and there was a bunch 2010, 12, 13. So, this is something that's been hanging with us for a long time. So to take on all of that, those things from truly legacy issues is a brave thing to do, because you could say wasn't necessarily our problem, but it is. So the recognition, I know, by Stephanie and the team to go, this is our problem, let's get rid of it, has been really important. So just, again, big acknowledgement to that. And I do think that stuff around what we have done, how we've done it, and some of the stats that you are looking to collect are really important. I love that stuff, so I'm looking forward to seeing those stats come back to us. So kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora.
So we'll move on straight into our councillors can have a quick stand up, but we'll get our presenters up for the next bit. We're 5 minutes into that, but that's not too bad considering the amount of questions. So
I'll just check in with Katie about the quality stuff I saw in your chat. Yeah.
Craig, do you prefer stats or maps? Stats or maps?
Both. Love them. Well, one question in particular I was interested in is, out of the, I think it was like 1,200 or more legacy consents we had, and just like, I know there was some we were trying to say, well, do you really need to still do these? So I'd be interested in those stats, like how many came through and how many were just let go by the things like that. Percentage will be quite interesting, yeah. Cool. But anyway, that's for a later time. Welcome, Brian. So we'll hand back to you and we'll get into this. Thank you.
Kia ora, Council. Thank you for the opportunity to have a second presentation on fees and charges and potential changes to the fees and charges schedule as part of the annual plan. This really is more focused, this presentation really on on the deposits and the other changes, but also the financial assurance, I would call it, the numbers that make up the recommendations. And you'll hear from Aurora for the bulk of the presentation in terms of what are the changes on what are we looking to achieve. And Brian, our Chief Financial Officer, will also take us through the financial aspects, including CPI as well. So I'll hand over to Aurora.
Hello again. Cool. So walking through our fees and charges now, that's a really critical part of the consenting service to make sure that our user pays functions operating in a way that aligns with the work that we've got coming through. We've obviously got our finance policy that asks that consenting is user pays, and this presentation is off the back of the earlier one that Brian and I brought some suggested changes that we've highlighted or we've found through our backlog experience, where we could be doing things better to both build in efficiencies into our process. So some of these relate to us being able to remove some of those old processes that I spoke about in the earlier presentation, but also making sure that we are getting our charging right for services that we provide. So we have found through that process that some of our charging wasn't aligned to the true cost of getting a consent out the door. And we know that now from some of the measurements that we've been doing for the work. And then there are a few that we think can greatly simplify our fees and charges, make it more transparent for people to understand how much it's going to cost them, and also some minor changes in making sure that we're ready for the future in terms of introducing a fast track charge and things like that. So just to recap, and I do have a slide just to show you a visual of how complex our current fees and charges process is. For an applicant, they need to wade through 19 different potential deposit amounts when they're applying for a consent with us. And most importantly, those 19 different charges for applications no longer align with what we've worked out through complexity. So in some cases, our deposit amount is very, very low compared to what we know it'll cost us to process a consent through because of the complexity of that activity. And that's where some of the frustration comes in from applicants, where they've paid quite a low deposit fee and then they get a big bill at the end. Now we know that we need to make improvements to our invoicing and the transparency on where the money was spent, and that is not part of this discussion today, but it's definitely on the consents process improvement list. So I'll come back to how we've come up with the proposed changes, but I did just want to highlight that this is what our current table looks like. So you don't need to be able to read that in detail, but this is the amount of changes that people need to wade through, and it requires people to essentially do an assessment without discussing with us or without us seeing the application on what the risk of the activity is, and often with the nuances in application. The lower amount for a low risk, and then we have to inevitably have the conversation that actually the application is more considered a medium or a higher risk. That results in a lot of rework before it's even in the building to make sure that we're collecting the right deposit. And sometimes it's vice versa. We do get people thinking they're high and it's actually low. So that results in us needing to track down and find a refund, and there's a lot of rework there. So what we've looked at is significantly simplifying our proposed deposits, and that's more in line with just the number of applications that people are applying for. And I believe if I jump through to here, putting it into a single consent. And I'll let Brian talk a little bit about how we've set the deposits, because we did some really in-depth analysis looking at all of the various types of activities and how much they had cost us to process. But also that process identified where we hadn't been correctly coding time, where it should have been cost recoverable time, and that was absorbed by general rate codes. And that is a really important point when we're talking through how we've arrived at these proposed deposit amounts. They accurately reflect the amount of time it costs us to process a consent. Did you want to talk a bit about the analysis there? Sorry, John. Yeah.
Sure. Obviously, in the ideal world, we'd probably have one single deposit amount, but we found that when we did the full analysis, that it actually set us up to have some fairly perverse results in some areas, because as you can see, the residential on site is much lower than even just the single consent, and two consents and three or more are significantly different in terms of average cost. And by having one or even two standardised deposit levels would have caused some interesting results. So we came down to the four generic options there based on how we clustered those types of activities, and basically took the medium of the jobs in the bottom quarter, because you need to set a fairly, not low, but fairly low-ish deposit level, so that people who have simpler consent applications are not going to be paying over the odds. There will still be some element of that, because there's always the ultra simple application which is going to come in below what our deposit level is, but based on the median of the bottom quarter, we will have by far the majority will be above that, and we'll be receiving an additional invoice at the end of the processing. So yeah, that's basically what we did.
And just importantly, as we have introduced that fixed fee for direct-to-decision applications, and those are the ones that are simple and able to be picked up and processed within that set amount. So that provides an incentive for people to provide everything that we need for an application, and if it meets the criteria, we can put it through for that fixed fee. So we're not proposing to change those. But just to recap, so the key change here that that council, we're asking council to consider is a change from that matrix of 19 different charges to a simplified flat rate deposit, regardless of the activity or risk, but related to the number of activities that people were applying for. And I do have a table that sets that out, if I can jump forward to that, but we might, would you like to?
Sessions. And then in terms of going forward, we've got there's that bit at the end about proposed change to charge out rates. That's important too, right? So we need to get to that. Okay. So I'm just mindful, just if we can keep the questions really quick, and then carry on. So Claire and then Dion.
So and understand the reasoning here. That's all good. For those that are significantly, are we going to have the flexibility to provide refunds? I mean, obviously we've got the administration to provide the extra charges. Is there going to be some flexibility in around being able to provide refunds on some of those deposits?
Yes.
Cool. I was going to ask the same question, but yeah, Dion.
I've got a slightly similar one, but I'm just looking at this setting deposits query thingy in the median, including for all of the others, for the single consents, you've got your proposed flat fee slightly below the median, but for the on-site wastewater, it's above the median. Is there any reason why you've done that differently? Are you expecting the on-site wastewater to increase in costs or for the consenting? I'm just wondering why you've set that higher than the median where the others are lower.
Fundamentally, approaching this very like a pricing decision. So we were looking to try and round wherever possible so they'd be easily understood by people. So the more decimal points and adjustments you have, the more complex the whole thing appears to the user. So we've tried to keep it nice round numbers to the nearest nice round number, if you like. So some went up, some went down.
Grant?
Yeah, my query is regarding the on-site wastewater systems and the charge for that. In my experience, in work that I've done in the past, I use a consultant to provide a plan and prepare the application that costs X dollars. Do we have a system in order to streamline the efficiency of this sort of system where a consultant who's an approved person, known by the organisation to provide good quality application, why then do we need to pay such a huge amount of fee for somebody who's done the work? And, is our system standardised enough to say, yes, this is the checklist, couple of hours work, sign off, we know this person's done it right, end of story? How does that, because otherwise somebody's potentially looking at $7,000 or $8,000 for an on-site wastewater system that's been designed by somebody else who's proficient in doing with it.
And take your point, it is a lot of money for mum and dad to be paying to put their wastewater system in. The reality is that even with the most straightforward on-site wastewater systems, we do still see them coming through in applications where they are wanting to put them in very close proximity to somebody's drinking water bore, as an example. And our planning framework directs that we assess those activities to the degree that we need to, and this is the price that it costs us currently. So to change that, it would need to be twofold. It would need to be a change to our planning framework, and it would need to be, quite a process to set up essentially an approved list. And there is some considerations around natural justice and fairness, which would need to be really carefully considered. But we have, in saying that, got our direct decision pathway where there's criteria that if any consultant can meet those, provided they work through the criteria and they provide us the good application, and then that's a fixed fee. So we've tried to align here that on-site wastewater system cost with also the ability for them to go down that fixed fee so that they're not seeing a bigger jump. So that, in essence, is a way of essentially asking you a question. If they provide us everything and we don't have the concerns, then they can pay the fixed rate of $3,500, which I do agree it is high, but it does reflect the actual cost that it costs the council to process these things. And we are trying to push out the durations where appropriate. So this is for on-site wastewater systems, average is around 15 years of duration. So when you break that down into a yearly cost for that system, it's a little bit more manageable, but I do take that it is a lump sum for people. And we are continuing to work with TAs on where reticulation is more appropriate through various mechanisms too. But I'll probably leave it there for the interest of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think Claire's question in terms of is there a refund available if they do come under that, and you said yes, I think that helps as well. If it is a good application that goes through at the $1,000 mark, the lowest one, then there's an ability to, refund people, so that's good. I think that's all the questions I had. Oh, Councillor McKenzie?
I just wondered why Grant's question was restricted to wastewater systems and not all consents, really, because whatever the cost of a consent is, it has not everybody has the equal ability to pay, and households are no different to small businesses or even small family farms. I also note that, as Aurora and Stephen are well aware, that the cock-ups are made over wastewater consents, and I've got one at home which happened. Yeah,
Thank you. Let's go. Let's carry on, Laura. Yep.
Yeah. So, council, just so we're clear, obviously a council briefing, but we're just looking for your guidance or comfortability over these matters being included as part of the annual plan. So you'll see on the slide there's a simple yes or no. It's just those would be the substantive matters of the changes. There are other changes that we will be going through, but
based on the information provided to us, I'm pretty comfortable. Councillors, what's the level of comfort around the room? Anyone allergically opposed to putting this forward as a consultation matter? Dion?
Personally, I'd like to keep it consistent for that wastewater treatment system is under the median. With all the others being under the median, I'd prefer that one to also be under the median, but that's my only personal view.
What do you mean? Sorry.
So the single 2 consents, 3 or more consents are
under the median,
below the median price, whereas the residential on-site wastewater system deposit is above the median price. So
$3,250 might be better.
Well, I'd prefer it at maybe even just $3,000 as a round number, but I just wanted to keep it consistent is all I was thinking.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, Claire?
I have an alternative view to that one because we've got the direct decision pathway fixed fee at $3,500, so which is our most simple, cleanest applications and quickest to go through the process. So if you use some of Councillor Edge's argument, we may as well just stick with the 3.5 there. So probably slightly different space.
So yeah, that's probably why the staff kept it consistent with that one. Yeah, cool. But in terms of putting it out for consultation, is everyone happy? John?
Yes, I am. I know I'll be challenged as to if it's going to cost me $7,000 for an application, are you going to fill the void to ensure you get your $7,500? So as long as I have the confidence that we have the refundability and that the work is then timed out and allocated correctly, then I'm comfortable. So that as long as I can have that argument back to my community.
Do need to point out that as part of this, we're committed to bringing these fees and charges back regularly, particularly in light of all of the changes that we're planning on doing across our regulatory system and the consenting system. And I think that we should annually be reviewing our fees and charges to make sure that we are appropriately charging. So that is well on our radar.
Let's move on to the next one. Thank you. I think you got your support, guidance.
Okay, so this looks like quite a big list, but this is some changes that we've identified that we need to make through the assessing how much things are costing us. Some of them do need a reduction, we've found, and some of them are like the ability to cost recover for fast track process, us being proactive with things that we know are coming. So I will just whip through those. Again, we've looked at our processes. Some of those charges where I haven't had them before, like our fast track, that's been an estimate of work that we've done for COVID-19 fast track. And for others, we haven't been able to capture them in our system. So again, taking my point around making sure that we're bringing back these fees and charges to you regularly to assess that they are still appropriate. Some of these are based on best estimates of the work that we've done, noting that we haven't been able to distinguish things in our system as well as we might have liked. So our current certificate of compliance is a fixed fee at $2,200, and it may seem a little bit contradictory that I'm now coming back to you and asking, can we please change it to a deposit? But I wanted to outline the reason why. Now, some certificates of compliance are very, very simple for us to process, and we can process them for a cost of around $1,500. But some of them are quite broad. So if we have someone coming in for a global certificate of compliance, then that can cost a significant amount of money. And it is one of the oddities of the things that we deal with. We don't see them a lot. So looking at the few examples that we had and the amount of time and cost it had, it was quite wide ranging. So that's why we're suggesting a change to a deposit of $1,500, which means we're not overcharging the simple ones, and we want to make sure that people can go, yep, sweet, here's my certificate of compliance. But sometimes there is the ability for people to apply for a very, very large one, and we need to be able to charge as we go time and materials for those ones. Now, that might be maybe 2 or 3 instances a year, so it's not massive, and hence why we're saying, actually, on reflection, looking at this, a deposit would be more appropriate for this specific thing. We don't have an application. This is a new one, but we have been assessing it, and Craig, I take your point around some of the stats for what was actually returned through backlog. Now, there was quite a number of these, and it's a lot of work for the team to go through and work through that process. So we're suggesting adding a fee for returned applications. Now, this is up to the applicant whether they, at the moment, they receive a refund of their deposit if we send their application back, or their fixed fee. And that means that we don't recover any of that work for the first 10 days. That 588 would, if we don't have the application then resubmitted, that would cover the cost to the council of us assessing that activity.
You got a question, Claire?
Yeah, so that's the pre-Section 88 work, are you suggesting?
No, that's the pre-application space, which is an hour free, and then it's charged. But this is for the ones that don't engage in the pre-application space because we haven't got a job open for them essentially. And they arrive, they pay their deposit. Currently, if we pick that up, we assess it, and we say that it's not complete and we're not able to process, we return the application, but we also return the money. And if it comes back in, that's fine. They pay the money again. But often we don't see an application again. And that's a cost to the council that's currently not able to be recovered. It is under our policy, but we don't have a charge for it. So that's the amount that we've assessed is the cost to us currently. Yeah.
Just to clarify for me then, if an application is returned and it then comes back in with the correct information, is the charge still applied? It's not. That was just if it goes out and they go, oh, yeah, whatever, then we are charging for the time accrued in the initial assessment. Thank you.
Keep going. we're at 12 o'clock, but we started 5 minutes late, so I'm happy to carry on.
Okay.
And I know that we've got a bit more to do. How do councillors feel about carrying on a little bit and we just start later after lunch? We happy? Because I think it's important we get through this.
We have till 12:30 booked for this.
Oh, cool.
And lunch at 12:30, Chair.
Sweet, thank you. Cool, thank you. Got heaps of time then.
Again, changes to fees for transfers and surrenders. Not suggesting any change for part transfer surrenders. That we've identified that needs a slight increase because largely around the complexity that we covered in discussion a little bit around water allocation and where people are partially surrendering or moving resources around in a catchment that can be quite tricky to work through, and the same with those transfers too. And we've identified that our bore consents need to decrease as part of the efficiencies that we've put in. And I'd just like to give council some confidence that that doesn't mean that we have been overcharging. That's a direct relation to us being more efficient and going, actually, for those types of consents, we can now process them cheaper out of the changes that we've made. So I'll just whip through these.
Yeah, and come back. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And then you can say yay or nay to the whole lot, and then we can move on, just in the interest of time. Our deemed permitted activity, we've again, similar to those code of compliance, but around the other way, we've identified that actually our deposit is set too low for those. We're setting people's expectations too low and then they get the bigger bill, we can generally process them around 1,000. Again, we've gone with a deposit because these not standard consent related. They can be tiny or they can be quite massive in terms of somebody coming in for a global. So the ability to charge time and materials if they are really complex is important. But again, getting that that deposit amount correct is important to set people's expectations and reduce the rework for the teams, finance and consents going back, answering inquiries and that sort of thing. Cool, and again, just a couple of simplifications and removals of specific fees. So the change of condition deposits, that is linked to if we remove that complex table, we need to make some tweaks to these two as well because we're moving to that, or we're proposing to move to that more simplified structure. So that's why those two are there, because they relate to the big, complicated 19 charge table. Cool, and before I hand over to Brian to go through the charge out rates, we'll just pause there for yes.
Well, I think we might have some questions about this. That swing mooring one, so you're saying that would become 3,500. That's quite a big change for those people. Is there, do they cost that much? They do.
Yeah, often, particularly in the swing mooring space, we're getting to a point where we've got an allocation issue. So there is more consideration to work through. And yeah, those are one of the ones where we've been significantly undercharging in the deposit space, and then people receive a large bill.
Big bill.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Cool. Any other questions from councillors? Claire?
Can I just go back to the question I had earlier around the returned applications? You mentioned that you didn't have a space for them effectively if they hadn't been through a pre-application process. Is that how have I misinterpreted that?
No, it's not space. It's so for pre-application people we give an hour free of time, so that's the general rate funding that goes into consenting for our pre-application service. And then if the pre-application takes longer, the team set up essentially it's an iJob, and that's where it starts being charged, and that comes off once they put in the deposit. The money's reconciled. That fee is only if we don't get an application back in. So once the job is open, the application is joined to that, so we know how much it's cost us throughout the process to date, and then it obviously goes through the whole process, and they receive a invoice if it goes over their deposit. This returned application would be to cover all of the admin that it costs us to get it to the point where we're saying we can't process this. We're always given the option whether they would like to engage in that pre-application space, and quite often we don't get any engagement further, so they don't come back with a new application. So it's essentially a job that's cost to the ratepayer. Yeah.
And what it might do over time is incentivise a better application, which has been part of the problem with the legacy stuff, right?
That's right.
So, and it's a bit like a tag-off fee, actually, incentivising people to tag off the buses. So it's just saying, get a better application to start with, and it's not going to create times and backlogs in the system.
Spot on, yep.
Any other questions on these? I was interested in why the numbers were like 588 and not some like nicer number. I thought these ones are a bit weird with their different numbers, but anyway, that it could be nice to see them a bit more rounded numbers, but whatever. Just because the rest are, but all good. Any other questions, or is everyone happy to include these in the consultation and the annual plan? Yep, looks like it is. So let's go to the charge out rate bit.
Okay, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
So basically, we wanted to go back and check the charge out rates against the point at which we last reset them in 22-23, or based on 22-23 data. And we, I think as discussed in the last briefing we provided, we produced and calculated up a CPI increase. In terms of this slide, it's come out at over the 3-year period, a 14.1% increase if we adjust the rate. Further on in the slides, of course, you'll notice that we've suggested that there are 3 options, one being to do nothing, 2 to adjust by 14.1%, and 3 to adjust by some staged range over the period. I think the thing to remember about this is that this is a catching up of the rate, for all the cost increases that have been going on for the last 3 years. As we well know, that wage costs and general CPI or business-related CPI have increased substantially in that period, and it is reasonable to revisit these rates on an annual basis to build in CPI generally. That hasn't been our practice previously, so we are asking for the council to start a new process of annually reviewing them, and in some years you're likely to do nothing, and in some years you're likely to take into account the latest CPI. I think the other important thing to note about this is this does not necessarily reflect a 14% increase in the cost of consents. This is purely the hourly rate applied, and what you'll find during the coming periods is that as the work that the consents team are doing unfolds, that we will progressively become more efficient at the production of a consent, and that will reduce the number of hours required to some extent, or maybe even fully offsetting the changes in the rates. So it is really, I suppose, on one hand, making sure that we are able to recover the real and genuine costs that are out there and the increases attached, while also, once those efficiencies unfold, actually producing the same or possibly even lower over time consenting costs. Any questions? Claire?
Yeah, I've got quite a few questions on this. Thank you. So through your chair, if I may, I'll sequentially ask them depending on the answer. I would really like to understand the figures and how they've actually been arrived at. Philosophically, I have no problem with increasing the rate. It's the calculation and the expectation there. But I've divided the hours by the direct cost expenses, and I've assumed that our staff are working on around 2,000 hours per year. I understand it might be slightly less than what we actually work on as the average for an employee, and I know that they're possibly not all on hourly, but sometimes salary. So my figures don't quite make sense when you divide them out. So if you turn it around and actually look at it from a general rated percent, it would appear that there's a huge cost going on to the consent users. Can you explain how you've actually arrived at this and why, when you divide 133,174 hours by 2,000, it gives me 66.5 FTEs, and I think there's probably nearly twice that man upstairs. So who's paying for the rest?
Oh, sorry.
Why does it look to be loaded onto the consents?
In terms of the hours themselves quoted there, it's important to note that they are the total chargeable hours. So there are many things that a planner may be doing during their day or their week which are not directly chargeable to a customer. So these are purely those billable hours in law firm terms, I guess. But they also obviously do admin, and they do training and all those other things. Sick leave and annual leave, yes, which all add up to the total picture of that 2,000. And of course, you've got to consider the question of how generically productive those people are in terms of we brought in a large number of new staff. If you have that, they will be less productive in terms of what they put through on an hourly basis than a highly skilled planner, etc. So these hours are actually based on what we've been achieving in the last year with our current staffing. So into that, we've got the total direct costs and expenditure which we use, which is largely labour costs to some extent, and all the associated costs around that, ACC, etc. And then any consultancy and other sort of stuff which is used in different ways. And overhead costs are then allocated over the top of that, because obviously we're doing a total costing model which includes management and the cost of buildings and cars and all those things which are used in the process of doing the work. And that comes down to ultimately the 159.83. And the original hourly rate we had based on the 23 data was 140. So we have this 14% gap, which is essentially a 3-year gap. So we acknowledge that in future years, it's unlikely to be anything like that level. It's probably going to be in the 2 to 3% range. But there is this catch-up element, which we are to some extent asking, how does council feel about doing the catch-up or some element of that catch-up? One of the later slides certainly just reminds council that we are expecting to see the user pays percentage of revenue climb up through the next few years from 56% to 74%. If we don't put in place this annual review of hourly rate charges, you'll start to see we will be struggling to get there, simply because we will be getting further and further behind the cost of actually doing an hour's worth of work on a consent. Given efficiencies, it won't necessarily reflect exactly like that in the numbers as we go, but it certainly will be making the job harder, I believe.
Thank you for your explanation. In our long-term plan, and these are just inclusive figures, yours are GX, these are inclusive, these are exclusive. We were looking at around 3 million roughly general rates. So it would appear that chargeable hours is extremely low per consent for the consenting side of it, the direct costs. And yet we're actually landing a heck of a lot of those other costs onto consent applicants that are going through. That's how I've read this. And I accept, the cost of training and the non-constructive. No, I've got non-constructive, that's not right. The direct, non-direct chargeables times, getting second opinions and people reviewing work, etc., etc. Just wonder whether that's something that should be a cost that lands on the organisation or the general rate pay. I have no problem with the percentage of user pays revenue going up year by year. It's just how that's calculated. I definitely know that previous term of council we did agree to annually adjust the charge out rate. I think that if the proposal that you've got here, which is the next slide, which we haven't got to yet, but actually clawing back effectively money that's already been paid, general rates has actually been has filled in those 2 years, that it's very unreasonable and unfair to actually go out asking for 14.1%. I'd far rather we made the error, the organisation made the error in not picking up what they could have done, and so therefore for me it would be starting off at the 4.7 or whatever that figure might be, and just learning from our lessons, learning some lessons.
Ian, and then I'll go to you, Vicky.
Yeah. Look, Claire's just made exactly the point that I was going to make. Is that I don't accept that new consent applicants have to pay for the costs of the last 3 years of underpaying consent applicants over the last 3 years, and given that most of those constituents have faced that. I'm happy for us to factor in inflation in our fees and charges and charge out rates going forward, but not retrospectively. I think that's unfair impost.
Thanks, Ian. Vicky?
Well, firstly, maybe we can just clarify, because I'm not reading this as being retrospectively applying it to anybody. I'm seeing this as being, we'll set a new rate and those who come in the door will then be charged that rate. Is that correct? Yeah. So, and to me, I mean, it feels perfectly reasonable to charge the rate that it actually costs us. I mean, we're always going to be a wee bit behind because your analysis is based on current, and we're always looking forward. So the sort of inflationary effects will take place. So you're actually always behind, and hence you're going to be struggling to catch up anyway, even applying that. Those rates, those hourly rates, to me look quite reasonable comparative to the sorts of hourly rates people would be paying consultants in the marketplace. So they're pretty like almost a bargain in comparison to what I think are consultant rates. So to me that seems reasonable, and I see no good justification for consent applicants who are seeking consent to do something. We have to do the work. That's the nature of it. I don't see why a general ratepayer should really be subsidising that process at all. We're already looking in 26, 27, we're going to 74%, so roughly a quarter subsidy in that setup, if I'm reading that table right. So for me, it's heading in the right direction, and I think we just have to step it up in a nice and cleanly catch up and move on. So I support the 14.1. Thank you.
Yep. Want a clarification, Claire?
I do, because I wonder why this council table or even the advice from finance is coming separately. We just had a discussion yesterday around user pays on our buses. We didn't talk about going back and grabbing the 3 years that we haven't actually, that other people have actually subsidised. So what is the difference? That's what I'd ask my council colleagues that are sitting at this table. It seems to be very, we're not taking a consistent approach here, so I'm very disappointed.
Well, I think it's because public transport is set up as a public good anyway. Well, don't know. I don't know if it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just argue to that? Because yes, if I apply for a consent, yes, I get a benefit. But the societal benefit of productivity and production and employment and a whole bunch of things sit there. So it's not just about an individual getting an advantage. It's about social cohesion and a responsibility to growing a community. So for me, there is a social benefit in it. So very, very simple. I'm quite happy to pay on an increasing basis, but yeah, as we say, not quite sure about.
I just think it's a lot clearer when it comes to public transport, because I think we all get into that knowing that that's what it's about. Plus, it's trying to address other externalities, which often in consenting we don't always address those externalities. So there are some issues there. Yeah. Dion?
I'm just going to bring it back a little bit to your question about, or your answer before about the charge out percentage. What is that? Is internally, I understand this is an operational matter, but are we looking to improve that percentage of charge out time that our staff have? So might have been a bit low now, and have we got a good plan to make that better so that it'll reflect more in the figures here?
Yeah, absolutely. So that has been a big focus. The low charge-out rates are a bit twofold. So has been inefficiencies, training, all of that that comes with bringing in and growing a team. But it is also in relation to the refunds that we were required to give. So that makes the overall section charge-out lower than it should be. We are seeing that trend steadily upwards, and the consent section for the first time ever is now breaking even and in the green, which is fantastic. So that is directly related to the higher chargeable hours that the team are doing. Yeah.
Oh, good. Vicky?
Yeah, something that I raised when we had our discussion in small groups about the finance side of things was around where our spending happens. And so, I mean, this is sort of like treating consents as if it's all just quite amorphous across the whole of Canterbury. But my sense is that there's particular areas where perhaps more of our consenting activity occurs. So to go to the sort of comparison with public transport, obviously public transport rates are targeted to those areas where there is actually the provision of the service and where the costs occur. So perhaps I was interested to see, are there particular districts, for example, that have the greatest amount of our conservation and so on? Then perhaps that's somewhere where we could see it more fairly, because I know with general rates, we're looking at somewhere over 50% coming from Christchurch. So is 50% of our consenting activity based on, dollar terms, is that occurring within Christchurch? And if so, then, maybe that the way the general rate picks up is fair. But otherwise, could we see a targeted rate approach, if we want to go down that route, based on where is the activity occurring? Because if the majority if a large chunk's occurring, say, in Ashburton, and Ashburton's picking up all that economic activity, as Councillor Sunkel's just referred to, then we look at a targeted rate within the Ashburton area to make up the match with the consent applicant's user pays part.
Yes, I think that is probably an interesting argument. I think it's probably best handled in terms of the finance and revenue policy review, because there is a complex issue around using the LGA criteria to evaluate whether this is a private or a public good and how that should be charged for. It's something that's bigger than we'd be able to do in terms of the annual plan at this point.
If we can go to the next slide, or the slide with the box where it's asking us yes or no, because I'm interested in the different different options there. Why the difference around 14.1 and then the 4.7? I mean, I get it that 14.7 is just for 1 year, but can you just explain that a bit?
We're essentially, with the 3 boxes, we're essentially asking for council's guidance as to what they would see as an acceptable result to this discussion. And we've just come up with the 3 most obvious options at this point.
Yeah, can you, 4.7, why that number? You just pick that? Yeah.
It's divided by 3.
Cool. Sweet, just trying to understand. Yep. Sweet, just to be clear. So, in effect, they would have, and then you're saying review it next year. Okay. How do people feel about the 3 options? Anyone? Are we going to support the top one or the middle one or the bottom one? I mean, where's the general support? Grant?
Yeah, I kind of think at the moment, supporting the top one, we said at the start of our long-term plan process, when we were looking at that we were in trouble. We were going backwards, and we were spending a lot of money from general rates where people were benefiting from that because we didn't have our appropriate fees and charges for consenting processes. And we did that exercise when we changed to our 3 core services, and that those administrative charges were to be brought into the picture and not seen as something on the side. That's the thrust of this. We need to pull this back. I don't see why we can't go with this 14.1%. Get us back on track as quickly as possible, and make it very clear to everybody, going forward. I suppose one thing that we haven't really discussed, which I was wondering in terms of the general rate proportion, we do have community groups who from time to time wanting to undertake environmental projects, and they may, for example, require a consent to do something. How do we deal with that? Is the idea of that when we're looking at revenue and finance or whatever, that they can be almost like a no charge thing. It's a service, a public service from this organisation to community groups who are actively improving the environment through voluntary those sort of things. So how do we deal with that?
We have that built into the annual consents budget. There is a small amount of money that is put aside as part of the general rates that is discretionary for community good projects like that. And the applicants have the ability to essentially put a case forward for the waiving of their fees, and that's transparently captured through the budgeting.
I'm keen to go around the room in the time we've got left, just to see where people are sitting on this. But Claire and Dion will ask a question if you...
Well, I do have another question. If the council chooses to go to the 14.1%, which is the cumulative clawback, where would that money go to? Because we don't have reserves accounts in consenting, do we?
What the 14.1% effectively means is that it would reset the rate in order to set it at exactly what the real cost is. It doesn't imply there will be any more money, because if you, with efficiencies, actually reduce the number of hours that you're spending, effectively you will have potentially lower cost consents, and you'll collect the same or less amount of money, depending upon the mix of efficiencies and the quantity of consent applications and all those things. So we're expecting, in terms of what we'd put in the annual plan, no change to total revenue, because we're expecting that Aurora and her team will be working on the efficiencies that offset this additional rate cost.
Deal?
I'm not too keen on doing 14.1%. I think that's quite an incredible jump at this point in time, because I don't know what it will look like in 3 years' time as well. So I'm probably, in our LTP, it does say that we adjust this yearly and consider it yearly. So at this point in time, given the changes in, I know that the team is upscaled, and we now need to look at what that looks like next year. So, I mean, I'm probably more preferable to look at the 4.7 in the interim at this point in time. I know we've got a lot of change in this space, and then coming back to us to understand what those targets that we want to set as a council in terms of the percentage of revenue versus public good, because obviously there is an element of public good around doing consenting and ensuring that the activities on the land just don't happen and do whatever they feel like doing. So yeah, I think I'm more preferable on the 4.7 at this point in time, and then coming back and understanding where things are at in 12 months' time to know where we go from there, because there's a lot changing in this space.
Thanks, Dion. Look, I'll just go around the table because we're running out of time. But people can, as they go around, you can say what you need to say. Joe, have you got a position?
Yeah, I mean, I support the overall kind of intent around simplification and transparency, and I'll second Dion's position, because I think it's that balance between supporting stability while, acknowledging the burden.
Claire?
The 4.7.
Cool.
The 4.7, or even I'd rather see CPI, because it's something that you can get a good, strong argument around. No problem with them increasing, but it's got to be relative.
John?
I'm with the 4.7 and then an annual review on an ongoing basis.
Cool. Jan?
Good. Yeah, I'm happy with 14.1 as this is going out to consultation. And then, it's not guaranteed. Let the people come back and talk to us. Kia ora.
Vicky?
Yeah, I'm struggling to understand how this is bringing the hourly rate up to the current cost. That's all that. It's not recovering anymore. It's not jumping ahead. It's literally bringing it up to the cost at the current time. There's a certain irony that I'm hearing people across the table who were most pushing to keep our rates rises low are now essentially pushing the rates rises up for next year to the general ratepayer. by not covering costs that we're identifying, and we've identified the hourly rate that's needed to just cover current hourly costs. Like, so for me, 14.1. And I also note that we have spent millions of dollars in the catching up from the backlog. So we have put millions of general rates into the backlog recovery. So don't say that general ratepayers haven't supported consenting, haven't recognised the need and all the rest of it. We made those decisions, but I think now is the time for consent applicants to actually cover the genuine costs to a point. We're still only next year, even with the hourly rates. If your table is the one, if I'm looking at the LTP budget table, that 66% recovery for next year, that's still meaning another 44%, 36%, I'm trying to do my numbers, 34% is still being, so a third is being offset and covered by the general ratepayer. So, 14.1, I can't actually see how you can justify not doing that and pushing up the rates to everybody. It seems nuts, is what you're talking about.
Grant?
Yeah, you've given us a reality check on true costs, and you've calculated this, and so I think going forward, it's very clear this is the hourly rate. Year on year after that, then it's an inflationary applied figure, presumably. But yeah, so 14.1.
And Greg?
Yeah, I like Vicky's idea actually of reflecting public good by a targeted rate, but that's not there. So, yeah, I just see it. If that's the actual cost, that's the actual cost. So 14.1. Kia ora.
Ian, are you there?
Yep, I'm option 2, the smaller rate of inflation, and we've been promised efficiencies, and I think when we first went to full cost recovery or to cost recovery and consenting 4 or 5 years ago, we were promised efficiencies, and we haven't actually seen them yet. So the smaller increase will help drive the need for efficiency in terms of staff costs.
Thanks, Ian. Paul?
14.1.
Genevieve, I think you put it in the chat.
Yeah, put it in the chat. Definitely 14.1 because it's realistic. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Nick?
Definitely not 14.1. I mean, I'm definitely option 2, 4.7%, and then CPI it year on year after that. I think in times like this and continuing cost rises, everyone needs to be more efficient. I think by 4.7% will drive the efficiency.
Thank you, Nick. Peter's sent a thing on the chat. He's option 2 as well. I definitely lean towards option 1, but I know that Nook and David aren't here today. Hard to know where this is going to land, but it could land on option 2 by the looks of it, if they voted that way, but I don't know. So it's pretty even. Maybe we just have to keep working on both, and both could be put forward as options in the consultation. Leave it to the ratepayers to decide, give us the feedback. All good? Yeah. Is that an option for us? We could do that. Yeah.
I got advice that consulting on 2 option is acceptable.
Cool. Yep. Sweet, sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for all the work, Greg. You got to.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a really good way to go with the 2 options. It's the narrative that goes with it that's important too.
Yeah,
kia ora.
Yeah, thank you. All good. Yeah, Grant.
Sorry, just picking up on this idea of the targeted rate for the general proportion of that. Is it something that could be looked at as well? What does that mean in reality, the targeted rate for where those primary public good for the public good? Well, it's the proportion of where the activity is occurring within Canterbury in terms of the use of that portion of general rate.
Yes, that's a kind of analysis we'll be doing with the revenue and financing policy stuff.
Cool. Thank you. It's lunchtime, people. Thanks for all the work. We're back at 1. Oh, kia ora koutou. Welcome back. So welcome to our team at the table to bring this.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome back.
Oh,
So welcome to our
that is
team
weird,
at
isn't
the
it?
table to
Peter,
bring this.
you got to mute. Can you mute him,
kia ora.
Katie? That's so weird. Anyway, there's it is the lag. Didn't realise they're that far behind us. So yeah, welcome team, bringing us this work on the treaty principles bill. So look, hand it over to you. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou, kia ora Chair. The purpose of this briefing is just to seek your guidance on proposed points for a submission in response to the Treaty Principles Bill, which is currently before the Justice Select Committee. I'd like to introduce Tom Scott, who is our Principal Strategy Advisor in the Tuia team. And so he's going to do most of the talking, so I'm going to pass over to Tom. Kia ora, Tom.
Kia ora koutou. I'm going to move through these slides pretty quick because I assume, given the, I guess, rhetoric around this bill, that you would have all heard quite a bit about it. So the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi bill was put forward as a part of the coalition agreement between the ACT Party and New Zealand National Party. The Treaty of Waitangi in legislation and to the exclusion of other principles. You would have known that and seen that this bill has become highly political and politicised. It has led to a, national kotahitanga movement, a national hikoi, and now all parties bar the ACT Party have stated that they will not support this bill past the next stage past the Select Committee stage. What we, need to remember though is that they're not beholden to those statements, so there's still, a need to put a position forward on this bill and for the council to make their views clear. I guess some other context is that the Te Tiriti partners of this council are strongly opposed to the bill, and that a submission on this bill would be the continuation, of recent reaffirmations and confirmations by this council for their support for the treaty partnership. I guess we'll go to the next slide. So what does the bill mean for council? I guess fundamentally it would likely change the way in which this council fulfills its obligations to its treaty partner. This council's obligations are grounded in a number of different pieces of legislation, including the Ngāi Tahu Claims Settlement Act, the RMA and the Local Government Act, to name a few that reference the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. Those principles and the ways of working between this council and its treaty partner are grounded in the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi that have been formulated and litigated on over the past 50 years, and which are not compatible with the interpretation of the principles within this bill. The principles contained within the bill would likely undermine the Tuia relationship and increase, a misalignment of partnership outcomes and priorities. In practice and at an operational level, we anticipate that this would lead to an increase in litigation and disagreement, both from the treaty partner, but also from the likes of consent applicants. And this is simply due to the change in definition and the need to relitigate and interpret what those principles would mean in the Canterbury context. Should we go to the next slide? So for council, we're recommending that misalignment with council's strategic direction. So this council has stated in its long-term plan that it is committed to becoming a treaty partner of excellence. That point on local democracy and accountability, I'll just go back to a point I previously made in that this council has worked over the past 10 years with its treaty partner to understand what the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi mean in this context for council and for the Papatipurunanga of Ngāi Tahu. By defining the principles in legislation, we would become bound by that interpretation. So it would potentially no longer be fit for purpose or would change the way in which we operate with our partners. And I guess I just reaffirm that there's a likely cost associated with this potential change. Should we go to the next step? So from here, we're proposing to circulate a draft submission on the bill with you all to gather your feedback, and then for the chair to sign that out under delegation. And this is just because of the truncated timeframes around the submission process. So select committee submissions are due on the 7th of January, but because of the annual closure period, anything would need to be signed off by the 20th of December from council. We're also proposing to circulate the submission to the Papatipurunanga ki Waitaha. Yes, and then we would report back in February to you all, and we're proposing that council speaks to a submission at select committee also. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Tom, mō tō mahi tēnei kaupapa. Ai, kia koutou te rōpu tīma, tuia, tēnā koutou. Any questions, councillors, feedback? Yeah, Jan?
Kia ora koutou, nei te miatu, kia koe Tom, tēnā koe. First one, I've got a few. First one, have you, spoken to Tūranga Ngaitau at all? And kind of, in previous submissions, we've kind of compared and comparisons. Have you had the ability to, or they haven't gone far enough yet?
We've had a preliminary discussion with Te Rūnanga o Ngāi Tahu and understand that they're submitting an opposition on the bill and providing key points to Papatipurunanga, but our engagement hasn't gone beyond that. That's again due to the truncated timeframes that this submission process has been under.
And in a similar vein to Uru Kahika, our regional unitary council, have they done a submission as well?
Yes, so we've been supporting Te Uru Kahika in the preparation of their submission. Again, the draft that we've seen is opposed to the bill.
That's all for me, Craig. I might have some more later.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions, councillors? No, it doesn't look like it.
Yep.
Right, Claire?
When are we likely to see this draft? Because I think my views will be dependent on how it's drafted, how it's written. There is... can we make comments now as well? Or not?
Yeah, I think it's tomorrow. That's what the slide says, but yeah. Keep going.
Well, I'll start off the conversation then. Look, I acknowledge that this is a real hot political potato. I think most people, you made the comment not beholden to comments, but I think that the current two of the government partners of the coalition government have said that this is not going to be enacted. It's not going to get any further past obviously the select committee discussion page. And I accept that discussion will not help unity across New Zealand. But I just also, as I say, I want to see how it's actually drafted. I mean, we have drafted other submissions that take opposing positions. It might not exactly be my position, and there'll be a range of council views at this table, and I'm having some difficulty how we actually express something when we actually do also represent the wider Canterbury region, which has got a wide range of diverse views. So,
yep, John.
Thank you, and I guess I speak in support of Councillor Mackay. For me, it is democracy at play. I absolutely understand that it is divisive and creating real tension. But again, it, in my belief, has a very limited life, and the conversation is out there. So I don't support us making a submission in the manner that has been articulated, because in my mind we are creating further division in doing so. Yes, we can support our partner, but what about the rest of Canterbury? Where does our governance sit across the whole, I guess, gamut of Canterbury? Are we just here to placate a partnership, or are we there to govern Canterbury? So for me, it will die a natural death. It's already happening. Why further inflame our own communities by putting in a strong submission?
Yeah.
Again. Yeah, just probably disappointing hearing some of those comments from the other side of the table. The relationship between Māori and the Crown holds immense historical significance, intertwined with colonialism, cultural identity, and the pursuit of justice. Throughout history, the dynamics between Māori and the British Crown has undergone substantial changes, characterised by partnership, conflict, and diplomacy. Te Reti o Waitangi has played a crucial role in shaping the obligations, interactions between local government and Māori. In the late 20th century, legal and historical studies on Te Reti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi grew, with scholars like Walker, Orange, Jury and Fletcher examined the English and Māori texts. The 80s and 90s saw a cultural and political renaissance in Māori language, culture and identity, with court cases like the 1975 Treaty of Waitangi Act and the 87 Lands case highlighting the treaty's importance. Local government has a critical role in upholding the principles of Te Reti, ensuring equitable outcomes for Māori communities and fostering collaboration that reflects the unique status of tangata whenua, mana whenua, as partners in governance. As such, Environment Canterbury has a responsibility to make its voice heard and advocate against this bill, which would fundamentally diminish these principles and erode the Crown's obligations under Te Reti. And some of those, just what this bill does, it erodes the Crown's responsibilities to uphold Te Reti o Waitangi. The treaty principles represent the partnership, protection and participation obligations between the Crown and Māori. Removing statutory references to these principles undermines the Crown's duty to honour its obligations to tangata whenua. The bill's failure to recognise the constitutional significance of Te Reti o Waitangi. The Te Reti is foundational to the governance of Aotearoa New Zealand. By attempting to diminish the bill risks disestablishing the shared framework of governance between Crown and Māori. The bill's direct contradiction of existing legislation, including but not limited to. The bill contradicts existing legislation, including the Local Government Act 2002 and the Resource Management Act 1991, which require councils to promote community well-being and respect the Crown's obligations under Te Reti. Removing these principles would render these protections meaningless and create inconsistencies across all public sectors. It would also disrupt local government partnerships with Māori, erode trust and alienate from local government. Here, that's our 10 Papatipu Runaka. What we have fought for since probably 2010 to really re-establish, and this bill and the outcomes from it is slowly eroding that. Local government cannot stand idle while such an affront to the foundational partnership between Crown and Māori is pursued. As a council committed to honouring Te Reti o Waitangi of excellence, Environment Canterbury have an obligation to actively oppose this bill and advocate for its rejection. It is recommended that the council support when we see the draft, and submit a strong objection to the Justice Select Committee outlining the adverse implications of the Treaty Principles Bill on the Crown-Māori relationship and its impact on local and regional government. Kia ora.
Thanks, Sharon. Joe?
Yeah, the bill is dead. So the decision that we're ultimately making is whether or not to take a political position. And if we have different views on it, then we should have a formal resolution as council. And that adds formality, that adds weight, and then that's the very clear democratic position adopted by the council.
Thanks, Joe. Dion?
We could bring something back on the 11th, if that was the will. But I do want to ask a couple of questions on the statements that are made on the impact on council. I just want to be very clear that these are statements or actual how this would actually... Because of the division this is going to create, I don't want us to be putting anecdotal evidence out there rather than I want us to keep on the facts. So undermining the Tuia relationship, Will that happen, or because that two-year relationship is between us as governors, is it going to undermine it, or is that more anecdotal?
It's happening right now. It's happening right now under under the changes to the Resource Management Act, and it'll continue to happen with this with what the bill is, and I guess the risk is whilst the bill may be dead, the presence of the debate and the division that it's created is I guess creating uncertainty and double questioning. So all of the impacts of these changes that are flowing through in legislation, actual or proposed, is already having effects on this team and the resources that we're having to divert to responding to a whole myriad of issues that are arising within council. So that is having its impact. And we've seen from the response and the correspondence that's gone out to Papatapu Runanga, and what we've heard back from the environmental entities is challenging they are challenging our interpretations. They're challenging the very things that council heard last week with regard to the ambiguity and changes around the RPS, the MPS, and the proposed RPS. All of those things are us, already in the mix and causing additional transaction cost for council.
I completely respect that. I'm just trying to be very clear because we're talking about the treaty principle bill. The RMA changes have made quite considerable impact on us as a council, as well as the partners, as well as our communities that we all represent. But I really want to be very clear that the statements that we're making around undermining the two-year relationship is specifically going to be around this bill. So that's what I was really asking. Everything else is kind of just like noise on the side. But the noise on the side is that I'm really worried about is the stuff that's happening behind the scenes at the moment while we're distracted by this. The removal of all of these pieces of lines in legislation about engaging mana whenua to the extent in which they would want to be engaged, that's getting removed out of a whole lot of bills in our government at the moment. That's the more pressing issues from my point of view that we need to be considering in terms of the two-year relationship and the partnership. This, to me, is a bit more of a side distraction. I get what you're saying, but I want to be very clear that we're making factual statements that don't inflame stuff that isn't based on fact. And that's what I'm really wanting to be very clear about.
And as Tom said, the current two-year agreement is built on the principles of the treaty as they have been interpreted for a number of years. The explicit introduction of a reinterpretation of those principles would require council under legislation to go back and look at and revisit all of those, the two-year agreement, as to whether it could give effect to that agreement in the way that it has done in the past, given the resetting of requirements now in statute.
Yeah, likewise, if it applied to Section 8 of the RMA, which may or may not survive, if this went through exactly as David is saying, any contemporary matter that our Papatapu Runanga are raising around some of the issues that they face through consenting and planning basically says you can't look at that because you have to go back to when they signed the treaty. I just think that is a fact. That will fundamentally change how we can interact with Papatapu Runanga. But of course, they can't go back to 1840. They're living right now with the issues that are hitting them contemporarily. So anyway, it will. I think David's answered your question pretty well, Dion. Stephanie, did you want to say something?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I just wanted to make a couple of comments in response to the question. Speaking as the Chief Executive, what I look at with regard to any piece of potential legislation in the House is the impact of us as a regional government to be able to deliver under the law of the land. And what I ask myself is, what are the current laws of the land, not what are the possible future laws of the land? And so in that context, while the question is, well, those other things may change, the reality is they haven't changed. This bill sits on the table asking for a response in the context of the law as it stands. And councillors have heard me before in this room with regard to other things that have been signaled for change. But as a regulator and based on jurisprudence to date, we cannot take action based on what some say will happen as opposed to what has happened. So I'd put that on the table first. The second question I ask myself is, as a regional government, what have I been mandated? What have we been mandated as a council to do? Bearing in mind that when the central government asks us, or by creature of statute requires us to undertake particular activities, when it does so, it then mandates us to become the treaty partner and be tangata tiriti. So how can I, as the chief executive, properly roll out or work in partnership as tangata tiriti? To do that under the current RMA and the current legal settings, and I would also note under the Ngaitahu Settlement Act and what sits inside the Settlement Act, I can only say to you, councillors, should that bill become an act, I cannot see how I can do that in good faith on your behalf.
Greg? Kia ora, Mr Chair. Tēnā koe. Tom, ko Greg Burns, toko ingoa. He tangata o Te Tiriti Ahau. I haven't met you. Nice to meet you. Kia ora you too. Ko reo. Where do I want to start? I've just made lots of notes. Look, I think Yane hit the nail on the head personally. I'll speak here I normally speak. We bang on all the time about being a treaty partner of excellence. We talk ourselves up. We have a journey that we have undertaken with the Papatipi Runanga here in Waitaha, Canterbury. I think it's a case of us having to actually, put up, talk what we, say what we think. I tend to agree too with Dion's comments. Some believe this is a bit of a smokescreen in that, in the meantime, up to 40 acts are having references to the treaty removed from them, and it's been very, very low-key. It's great that a number of people around the table have faith in our great leader, but if you listen to his language over the past year, it has softened somewhat, really categoric at the start. The great fear is that in dog whistle politics, the way that ACT have written it, it is compelling to middle New Zealand who don't have any historic context or choose not to understand it or at least accept it. Everyone's equal under the eye of God or whatever the hell it is. But what am I saying? I'm kind of saying what I'm saying, Dion, is we can be smug and we can do whatever we do, but we constantly talk ourselves up about being a partner of excellence. If we are, then we support being a partner. My view is we're not actually a treaty partner. We are an outcome of the treaty and bound to the relationship that therefore. I'm all for us putting in, and I think in our strongest terms, and I think we need to make reference to that we think it's a bit underhanded, the work that they've been doing in the background. The other one too is Joe does raise a good point, and certainly without putting words into anyone's mouth, there clearly are some differences of opinion. Why don't we put it to a vote? Why don't we put it to a vote? Because the beauty about a vote is the people of Canterbury then get to see who sits where, what, how it may be, if you really choose to be that way. So, I think we have a responsibility as representatives to make sure that we do put a submission in. And everything behind me and everything we talk about and everything on our website gives us a steer on what that submission should be. Kia ora.
Greg, Grant?
Yeah, Greg, I agree with everything you've said. I think we definitely need to put a very, very strong submission against this bill, for all those reasons Greg's just said. The journey that we've come on, the treaty settlement behind us. When you read the clauses in there, it's very clear what the government has given to Canterbury and Ngāi Tahu in terms of an apology for breaches of the treaty, and that we're working under principles that were enshrined in that treaty, and we have some political party that wants to remove the significance of that, it's just not good. So I think a really strong submission. We have shown, since I've been here for the last 5 years, a growing sense of partnership with Runanga. And as part of that, the big part of that was the consensus among people around this table and the previous elected representatives to the Ngāi Tahu Representation Act. And that showed a strong agreement. That's pretty powerful stuff. Went to Parliament, we made a really good statement on that. And I think the benefits from that are basically saying that we want to enshrine our partnership. If we're not supporting a really strong submission coherently as representatives of the people of Canterbury, then what does that say about our past voting methods when it comes to supporting the partnership? Well, I'll leave it up to staff. I mean, you put something together for us to have a look at. If it does come before council and it's debated, I don't think that would be... We have an opportunity to show unity in our community, not divisiveness. If divisiveness is in Wellington, it doesn't necessarily need to be here in Canterbury, because we have grown with the understanding of partnership and what that means. So maybe in the submission, it's really working out exactly describing that partnership. What does it mean for us? And Stephanie's kind of commented on that. But I agree with Greg, this business of underhand, behind the scenes removal of references in other legislation while this thing's going on is really devious. You know, successive governments since the signing of the treaty have undertaken really quite devious measures to undermine the treaty. Well, no, it's not. You go through the history of all the things that went. You know, you've attended the workshops about what the treaty and the outcomes and the subsequent legislation, which has undermined stolen land and all the other sort of stuff. But anyway, in terms of the principles, I think it's, you know, really a strong case to support a submission against it.
Vicky?
Yeah, I think it is really divisive. It's clearly really divisive. I don't think our submission will make it any more or less divisive than it already is. It's a shame that the current government, who have said we're going to go through this entire process, we'll put in submissions, but they're going to vote against it anyway. It's just bizarre. Don't understand that. But anyway, I think given the context, it's important that we get our submission on record, that it's seen what we think, what the impacts are on us, and that's what you've brought to us. So I'm very comfortable with putting that, and I think we absolutely should put that. I don't think that leadership and being a politician necessarily means just trying to weigh up what do the majority think always. And I know there are people around our table who will make difficult, sometimes quite contradictory views to maybe the majority, and that's, you know, respect that that's something we should do. In this case, I'd like to think, given that we did support the Ngāi Tahu Act, that we would have almost majority at least to support a submission. And so now I support putting that. I think making reference to the sort of those changes that are going on, there's some really specific examples of how those impact on us, because of course this bill proposal would, I think, free up and enable further changes and erosion of where we've achieved, where New Zealand seems to. It feels to me as a relative newcomer to New Zealand like things have progressed really, really well in the sort of 13 odd years that I've been here, and suddenly it's all feels like we're unraveling. And I think we should make a real clear statement that that is not to the benefit of everybody, even if everybody or many people don't understand quite what this is actually meaning. I think we've got the skills and capability in house to make a clear argument and make that really clear and have it on record. I support doing this. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Peter, online.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Pretty simple observation on this is that I want to see the draft, obviously, but I spent 9 years supporting getting ourselves into a partnership with Arunanga and getting some trust there from 2016 onwards. This is too late to make any U-turns on that, not that I would. I think we're talking about a submission, and our submission should put on paper what we believe as the regional council. I'm a bit concerned, I guess, from David's comments that he's made with what's going on in the background. I can understand the angst, but I'm a bit concerned about that. It's not the way that we would choose to operate in Canterbury or in, across Te Waipunamu either, because I mean, our conversations that we've had is how can we do more together rather than less, and I still firmly believe that that's our future, to understand more what we've got in common than things that are going to tear us apart. I mean, one of the concessions that have been made is that, you know, under the Settlement Act, Ngāi Tahu have rangatiratanga, which gives them the opportunity and also gives us the opportunity to have representations at the table. So yeah, I don't know what the draft's going to look like, but I would support putting in a submission and speaking to it so people understand where we are and where we stand. Thank you.
Kia ora, Peter. Joe?
I think it could be quite good as well to have quite like a legal aspect to it, like the way it's written really relate to Article 2, which we know is, you know, about resources. And as what you've said is quite enlightening around how the simplification of it and the principles as per the bill would totally alter the fabric of this building and its recent history. So taking quite a legal approach to it, I think would be helpful, but also in a way that the public can understand too. So we can treat it as an educational submission too.
Dion?
Yeah, something you mentioned before around the cost has got my sort of ears up a little bit now. I imagine those costs would be through increased litigations, through our processes, and various uncertainties around planning and whatnot. Have you put any of your mind towards what that, you know, quantifying that potentially, or is it just kind of like it will do it rather than actually thinking about the downstream effects?
Yeah, so it's just that there's a risk of increased litigation, and should the principles be progressed, there would be a likelihood that we would be required to make reference to those new principles where we would otherwise make reference to the current understanding, and then the understanding, going through the process of understanding how that applies in our context would be quite significant, given that it's taken 50 years of court decisions and policy from central government to come to the current understanding. It's likely that there would be a long and arduous process associated with that also.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, because I was just kind of sitting here trying to get my gears going in the back of my brain. So the submission that we will do will be, there's two ways we can look at it. It could be quite political or it can be quite factual. And what way are you wanting? Because obviously there might be politicians wanting a political statement rather than a factual operational one. So I just wanting to know what you're intending on bringing to us.
Yeah, so currently what we're looking at is taking positions under 3 separate headings. So constitutional matters, which I guess is the legal aspect which you were talking to, Councillor Davies. And then secondly, the Canterbury context, so the impacts which this bill will have on the Tuia relationship and the work that's been done over the past 10 or so years to get to the current state and understanding. And then thirdly, it's that kind of cost benefit. What is the operational impact of this bill on our operations and understanding going forward?
Can I just say that? I mean, that's quite perfect. I think I'm more comfortable with what you're saying there, because I'd written down 4 kind of points that I think are relevant to the organisation and the way we function, which would be the cost to the ratepayers, the disruption to the effective local governance, the impact on the environmental management, and then the loss of the established working relationships that benefit the wider community. So that's quite operationally focused rather than looking at the wider political impacts of it. So I'm far more comfortable in that respect. Thank you.
Thanks, Dion. Any further comments, councillors?
Yes, I've been waiting in the background.
Oh,
I
sorry,
can't
Genevieve.
seem to-
Where you go, Councillor Robinson.
That's okay. Oh, it's all right. Actually, look, it's been a really interesting conversation, but unfortunately, I find it, some of the comments feel very, very much against what we have discussed in the past and confirmed in the past. And I find that really, really upsetting, actually. And especially, I can imagine being in the room with some people who have been part of this process for a long time. And in particular, Yayan, when he first spoke, I feel for you and I feel for all the team in the room, actually, and all of us that actually promise to do our best. So bringing this forward is one thing, and actually putting forward a decent submission on this, and having a very, very clear statement and directive, actually. I think we need to be like that, because otherwise it's just watering down our viewpoint. I'd really strongly support that, but I wish I was in the room, because I can understand that for some people the emotion would be quite heightened, but really disappointed in some of the conversations across the table from the others. You've been here a long time and you've been part of this conversation for a long time, and to hear some of your comments is actually really, really disappointing.
I think that's all the councillors that wanted to speak. Look, I wanted to acknowledge the team, Tom, Davo, and Terry, and the rest of the team that's in the room as well. As Genevieve's just said, it is a tough time when you're connected to this in the way that we can be. But yeah, the way that you presented this, especially you, Tom, in terms of that answer just then around the 3 areas of the submission, really appreciate that, because I do really think it is about leadership, and I acknowledge the concerns that some may have about how this may be seen by some other members of our community. But I take Councillor Davies' point that it is a chance to educate as well. Like we have been trying to do in this organisation for a long time, and a few people have made reference to our journey on the wall over there. It's not just a picture on the wall. It is actually a real thing that we deal with every day, and I know our Tuia team in particular deal with that every day as they interact with our Papatipu Runanga in their worlds, trying to understand how to interact with this structure in this place. I've been involved in that all my career as well, and I understand what that's like. And when it keeps changing, and in this case, seemingly going backwards, it's tough because we have made so much great progress together. And I think, like Councillor Scott said, that is what we want to do more of. And I often say to people, well, you can't, once you've seen it and once you've felt what it looks like and feels like to work together, you can't go back anyway. Even if something tells you you're not allowed to do it anymore. So in reality, our relationship and our partnerships that we have with Papatipu Runanga will have to keep growing, but it makes it really tough if we have words like, especially in the Principle 2 stuff of this proposed bill, that just really doesn't acknowledge the original agreement that was made in our country. So I think that's the key thing for me. So thank you for the work that's going on this. I've heard pretty strong arguments that, yes, we should do the submission and in the way you've described, Tom. I did hear from some councillors proposing that it could come to a council meeting, which we do have one next week. I know the timeframes are pretty short, doesn't quite match up with the timeframes on the screen. Is there any possibility of that? Have you got time to do that? Do you think we've got enough time to do that process?
Thank you, Chair. So what we could do is, the council paper and agenda is due to be published tomorrow. So it could go as a supplementary, which gives a little bit more time. The alternative is that we could put a report into the agenda tomorrow with the submission as drafted, circulate it also to councillors, get feedback, and then prior to the council meeting update the submission with the council feedback in it. So that sort of so you could either have it as a supplementary. The risk around that may be some of the optics of it going so late in the piece and not being available to the public for feedback. The other way is that you're only just seeing the submission as it's going into the agenda, but we could mitigate that with the opportunity that it's being circulated and councillors providing feedback, and we then update it prior to council.
I think councillors would need to know that that would only mean that you've got the weekend and Monday and Tuesday to provide feedback. I mean, probably maybe even Monday, so that the team can then update the submission ready for that to be tabled on Wednesday, which isn't much time. So it depends how we want to go here. I'm open to it, but I'm in sort of council's hands in terms of how they want to go forward. Is there a feeling in the room about taking it to the council meeting with the process that David's outlined about distributing it tomorrow, putting the draft in the papers so that others can see that as well, and then having feedback and updating a paper and tabling that on Wednesday? Dion?
I'm personally okay with it coming to the council meeting. I think it would be actually good to do the political debate alongside the actual factual submission. So I think that's why we can get that political stuff if you wanted to do that. But I'm probably more in favour of a supplementary, given I think there's risk if we put a draft out and it's not finished. We want to be quite tight on how we do that. Yes, you've outlined that risk, but we will still be having the debate in public, and the submission will be in public. So I think that risk is relatively low. That's my personal view.
Greg?
Kia ora. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, either way, certainly there's a few with an appetite for it, and the one benefit of doing it at council is it's going to make the paper, which is great. So we're going to have, hopefully, well, no, it is. That's great because it's part of that educating the. Yeah, don't worry. Subtitles are the one that worry me. I'm BURNS on the ECAN. Not that I'm. It's not killing me, but yeah. Again, that lends itself to that education and the fact that we have a position. I think it's important. Kia ora.
Yep, Grant.
Yeah, the supplementary approach rather than putting it as a draft, I think that could be dangerous and confusing to people. I don't know whether extraordinary and urgent business, is that the other route or not? Don't know. Anyway.
Yep, David. You don't have to turn it off, Grant.
So if proposed that what we could do is circulate the submission tomorrow, ask for feedback by the close of Monday or by midday Monday, ideally. That will give us time to turn the submission around and incorporate, and we could then also, I can take it to our weekly meeting with the chair and deputy on Monday afternoon, and then we could publish the supplementary paper on Tuesday, which is the day before council meeting. So that could be an alternative approach.
Councillors, Jane, do you have a view?
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Genevieve.
My hand doesn't seem to go up. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I think actually having a little bit of a debate in public and the time frame you mentioned suits me. I actually feel in this instance, although we all have a bit of a view, I feel actually quite firm that the likes of Yayan and Nook need to feed into this more than others. That's just how I feel, but that's personal. And time frame suits me. Thank you.
Yeah, Yayan.
Kia ora, David. Thanks for that feedback. That sounds good. Gives makes us time to really reflect on it, and then gives it to put it out into the Canterbury, into the public, and just acknowledging Genevieve. No, it's for everyone, Genevieve. We're tangata tiriti, tangata whenua, so it's a 50-50 partnership. So we're all involved. Kia ora.
Any other views on the process?
No, but thank you, Yayan. I understand that. I just think your voice was understanding, and you had a point. That's what I was probably trying to say. But I agree. Thanks.
Thanks, Genevieve. In terms of the public side of it, I suppose that's the only other part of it. By doing a supplementary, is there anything on there goes on the agenda as a item without a paper, or is that you can't do that? Because I'm just worried that people won't know unless if they're watching today, they might find out. But how can they be involved in that process if they want to be here? Because you have deputations that are available for people to do.
Yeah, that's the thing that will be truncated. So we could get the material posted on the website on the Tuesday. That's of course the truncated piece for visibility if people should they want to come as a deputation. But that's the trade-off.
Just as long as we're all aware of that, I suppose that's the main thing. Greg?
Could we use our networks, I suppose, for want of a better expression, to put it out there that it is coming?
Well, I suppose it's public. Today we're speaking about it, it's in public, so no worries. I wouldn't imagine if we make that decision. Yep. Yeah.
So just the process on deputation, because now if this is going to council, I'm sure that probably our treaty partner might want to come in and do a deputation on it.
Yeah, well, the process would still be available to them, I'd say, now that it's been said in public that we would do this. But also, as it's published on Tuesday, there's still a chance because that can still happen. What's the time frame for cut-offs for deputations? I'm pretty sure it's like right up to the...
Pretty close.
It's
up to the chair's discretion.
Right up to the moment.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Sweet. Cool. Okay, so I think that's lots of nods around the room. That's the process we'll take, so let's do it. Thank you. Thanks, team. Kia ora. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora koutou.
And I think